Chapter 1472. The Twilight Plane was too dangerous for Yi Chen and the other two. The three of them decided that they would never come back to the Twilight Plane before they condensed their divine power. Time passed quickly. It had been 2 million years since Yi Chen came to the Heaven Realm. Duguju and the others had mostly come to the Heaven Realm. Those who didn't had either died of old age, died in battle, or died in the chaotic battlefield. During this time, Murong Qingqing and Su Jing had both become beginner demigods. From now on, their lifespans exceeded 100 million years. During this time, Yi Chen had comprehended the 300th and 400th beginner divine skill. His strength had increased to the next level and he had passed the 18th floor of the Sword God Tower. However, the one who improved the most was the Radiant Star Sword Saint. Tens of thousands of years ago, the Radiant Star Sword Saint had condensed the Sword of Soul. He had been refining his divine power for the past tens of thousands of years. The last time he came out, he had actually reached the 25th floor of the Sword God Tower. One should know that the higher one went, the more difficult it would be. From now on, the Radiant Star Sword Saint is no longer on the same level as us. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint sighed. Yes. Yi Chen nodded. Almost all the battle sages of Overgod forces had comprehended the laws. Therefore, whether or not they condensed their divine power was the dividing line between the strong and the weak. Without condensing their divine power, it didn't matter if they were beginner battle sages or advanced battle sages, they were all weak. Once they condensed their divine power, even if they were beginner battle sages, they were still strong. Before condensing his godly power, Radiant Star Sword Saint was only a bit stronger than them. But after condensing his godly power, Radiant Star Sword Saint would only need a light sword strike to kill them. Yi Chen estimated that the current Radiant Star Sword Saint was a lot stronger than Battle Saint Ride. After all, Radiant Star Sword Saint had comprehended Starlight Law, which was a powerful law second only to peak laws. We need to work hard too. We need to condense the Sword of Soul and refine our divine power as soon as possible. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint clenched his fist. Those who had comprehended the laws of nature and were able to refine divine energy were powerful demigods. Among Overgod forces, the majority of high-rank battle saints were powerful demigods. The majority of high-rank sword saints in Sword God Palace were also powerful demigods. Intermediate-rank battle saints and sword saints were much rarer. Only 1 out of 10 could become a powerful demigod. Normally, only the elites could refine divine energy at the intermediate rank and become a powerful demigod. As for Ultimate Battle Sage, that was an even higher level, so he couldn't think about it for now. I will. Yi Chen felt that he had already touched the threshold of the Sword of the Soul and was only 1 step away. As usual, Yi Chen would head to Sword Heart Island to look at the word after the power of the word dissipated. Yi Chen had been in the Heaven Realm for 1,500,000 years. The Radiant Star Sword Sage arrived at Green Lotus Island, laughing heartily. Yi Chen and Dan Yun Sword Saint were there, drinking and chatting. Bright Star Sword Saint, have you already converted all of your power into godly power? Yi Chen asked. Bright Star Sword Saint picked up a cup of wine and gulped it down. Not bad. After spending several 100,000 years, I've finally converted all of my power into godly power. Godly power was the fusion of all of one's power, which was why it was so powerful. Congratulations. Yi Chen and Dan Yun Sword Saint hurriedly toasted Bright Star Sword Saint. Although he wasn't on the same level as Yi Chen and Dan Yun Sword Saint, Bright Star Sword Saint didn't put on airs and said, "You guys have to work hard too. Once you condense the Sword of the Soul, you'll be able to comprehend divine skills very quickly, and your comprehension of laws will also increase very quickly. Without reaching this level, you won't know how wonderful it is. We've known this for a long time. Unfortunately, condensing the Sword of the Soul isn't that easy." Dan Yun Sword Saint smiled bitterly. "I'm preparing to go to the Twilight Plane again to see if I can get some divine stones to upgrade my Sky Saint artifact. It's a pity that I can't go with you guys." Bright Star Sword Saint was very confident in his own strength. At his level, unless it was an ultimate battle sage, even if his opponent was stronger than him, it would still be very difficult to kill him. Be careful. Yes, don't be careless. Don't worry. I won't be so unlucky as to meet an enemy ultimate battle sage. Sword Heart Island. Yi Chen didn't know how many times he had come to Sword Heart Island. Sometimes he went alone and sometimes he came with Dan Yun Sword Saint. As he observed the word, time passed by bit by bit. Sword Heart Island contained the powerful power of the word. Time obviously slowed down a lot. 100 years inside was longer than 10,000 years outside. Unknowingly, Yi Chen's body started to emit a faint heart force. Although this heart force was faint and faintly discernible, it was extremely sharp. Immediately after, the word in Yi Chen's eyes started to change. First, he practiced countless divine-level sword arts. In the blink of an eye, more than 1,000 primary divine-level sword arts were all practiced. The speed was so fast that it made people's hair stand on end. Yi Chen couldn't react at all. His sea of soul was surging. In another blink of an eye, more than 50 intermediate divine-level sword arts were also practiced, followed by 3 advanced divine-level sword arts. After 3 blinks of an eye, the word, sword, turned into a figure that was sitting cross-legged. This figure was blurry, but the power it gave off caused the world to fall silent. Yi Chen had a feeling that this was the image of the sword god. Soul sword. Someone has created a soul sword. Sword Heart Island became lively. Many sword saints looked at the place where the heart force waves were extremely intense. There, an illusory divine sword was being born. In the center of the illusory divine sword was a human figure. Is this the spirit sword? At this moment Yi Chen was in a mysterious realm. He felt that he was omnipotent and that there was nothing that could stump him. He felt that he was incomparably strong. This strength was not external but internal. Apart from that, his extremely powerful heart allowed him to have absolute control over his various powers. This was probably the key to refining divine power and becoming a powerful demigod. I've finally come to this step. Yi Chen was filled with anticipation. After the Radiant Star Sword Saint refined his divine power, his strength would become unbelievably strong. Yi Chen himself had comprehended the complementary laws of nature and the 5 elements. He wondered how strong he would become after he refined his divine power. Other than that, Yi Chen was more concerned about the fact that he had 3 Supreme Sword Intents. Could it be that the 3 Supreme Sword Intents would all be integrated into his divine power? Divine power was the fusion of all powers, and sword intents were included. There's no rush. Yi Chen was familiarizing himself with the spirit sword. My spirit sword is blue in color. Gradually, the realm of the spirit sword stabilized, and Yi Chen discovered that his spirit sword was blue in color. The spirit sword was also the light of the soul. On the surface, the light of the soul referred to the light emitted from one's heart. Since it was the light emitted from one's heart, it would naturally have a color. The color varied from person to person. For people with a dark heart, the light of the soul would also be dark. For people with a bright heart, the light of the soul would also be bright. It reflected the nature of a person's heart. Yi Chen's spirit sword was blue in color. This color was on the cold side but very pure. It was in line with Yi Chen's nature. He was cold but very righteous. Chapter 1473. After leaving Sword Heart Island, Yi Chen immediately went into seclusion. He needed time to refine divine power. This was a huge project. Under the control of the Sword of Spirit, Yi Chen gathered all the power in his body to his heart. The heart was the center of divine power and also the place where divine power was produced. After all, the Sword of Spirit was also born from the heart. It was as if all the streams had returned to the origin. All the power gathered. First was the inextinguishable power of the spirit body, followed by the sword energy and chi, then the sword domain and sword intent. Apart from the laws, all of Yi Chen's power gathered at his heart. The whole heart gave off a colorful light, jumping and vibrating. Fortunately, it was protected by the Sword of Spirit so it wouldn't explode. Fuse. The existence of the Sword of Spirit allowed Yi Chen to control so many powers with ease. Taking a deep breath, Yi Chen started to fuse the powers and refine divine power. Strand by strand. Refining divine power was very slow. If Yi Chen's original power was the vast ocean, then the process of refining divine power was like drawing seawater into a river. The river seemed wide, but compared to the ocean, it was not worth mentioning. No wonder the Radiant Star Sword Saint had spent hundreds of thousands of years to convert all the power in his body into divine power. However, what excited Yi Chen was that the 3 Supreme Sword Intents were all fused and converted into divine power. This meant that Yi Chen's divine power had 2 more types of power than others. Let's see how powerful the divine power is. 100 years later, the divine power in Yi Chen's body began to take shape. It was a blue power, very vast and pure. He flicked his finger and a blue finger force flew out. Boom. Terrifying ripples appeared in the sky. Time and space were distorted. The entire Sword God Palace was enveloped by a formless power. Green Lotus Island was the same. In the past, when Yi Chen used his full power, he couldn't even cause the formless power to move. Now, with a flick of his finger, he had such power. One could imagine how big the difference was. Amazing. Just the divine power alone is already stronger than my previous attack. If I use the divine skill, Yi Chen couldn't estimate his own power anymore. He had to challenge the Sword God Pagoda to find out. Green Lotus Sword Saint, you've already condensed the Sword of Spirit? One day Sword Saint Dan Yun came to Green Lotus Island. He had just returned from his mission and learned that Yi Chen had condensed the Sword of Soul, so he immediately rushed over. Not bad. Yi Chen nodded and called Sword Saint Dan Yun over. Congratulations, I wonder when I will be able to reach this step. Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint was incomparably envious. He had become a mid-grade Sword Saint a step earlier than Yi Chen, but he didn't expect Yi Chen to surpass him. I was lucky. Condensing the Sword of Spirit was not something that one could control. When the time was right, it was naturally done. From now on, you are also a powerhouse and you are even stronger than the Radiant Star Sword Saint. I don't think anyone below the Ultimate Battle Saint level can kill you. Sword Saint Dan Yun knew Yi Chen very well. Not only did Yi Chen comprehend the complementary laws of 5 elements, but he also had the 3 supreme sword intents. His foundation was much better than the Radiant Star Sword Saints. Excluding the Ultimate Battle Saints, if the Radiant Star Sword Saint was considered ordinary, then Yi Chen was definitely in the upper tier. Although he wasn't at the peak, at least the peak wouldn't be able to kill him easily. Another 100,000 years passed. Yi Chen had already transformed 1/3 of his divine power. The divine power in his body was surging like the sea. Just like what the Radiant Star Sword Saint had said, after condensing the Sword of Spirit, the speed at which one's law level increased was at least 100 times faster. In 100,000 years, the speed at which one's law level increased was much faster than before. Sword God Pagoda. Yi Chen started from the 19th floor, the 20th floor, the 21st floor, the 22nd floor, the 23rd floor, the 24th floor. Yi Chen effortlessly passed the 24th floor. This floor was the level of the Radiant Star Sword Saint. The 25th floor, the 26th floor, the 27th floor. When he reached the 28th floor, Yi Chen finally stopped. The 32nd floor and above is the level of the Ultimate Sword Saint. I'm still 5 floors away from the Ultimate Sword Saint. These 5 floors were not to be underestimated. Every floor was extremely difficult to pass. The reason why Ultimate Battle Saints were called Ultimate Battle Saints was because not only did they complement each other, but their divine power was also quite perfect. However, Yi Chen's divine power was not perfect. His sword origin, sword domain, and sword intent were all not perfect. Thus, the divine power formed from their fusion was naturally not perfect. Reaching the 28th floor, which was the same as passing the 27th floor, rewarded quite a lot of contribution points. Passing the 19th floor, rewarded 26 million contribution points. Passing the 20th floor rewarded 52 million contribution points. Passing the 21st floor 100 million. Passing the 22nd floor 200 million. Passing the 23rd floor 400 million. Passing the 24th floor 800 million. Passing the 25th floor 6 billion. Passing the 26th floor 2 billion. Passing the 27th floor 4 billion. A total of 8 billion contribution points. Another 400,000 years passed. Yi Chen had been in the heaven realm for 2 million years. Yi Chen had already converted all his power into divine power and comprehended the 500th primary godly skill, Shattering Heart Sword. In 5 million years, Yi Chen comprehended the 600th and 700th primary godly skill. In the 300th year, he comprehended the 800th primary godly skill. It's getting hard. Yi Chen faintly felt that it was getting harder to comprehend primary godly skills. The higher the level, the harder it was to comprehend. Although his comprehension ability had increased a lot after condensing the Sword of Soul, sometimes, a high comprehension ability was not as useful as a deep foundation. For example, if Yi Chen was given a middle-level godly skill, Yi Chen would not be able to comprehend it. This required an incomparably deep foundation. Sword Saint Snowheart comprehended more than 200 primary godly skills not because he had nothing better to do, but to build his own foundation. In 8 million years, Sword Saint Scarlet Cloud also condensed the Sword of Soul. The Radiant Star Sword Saint and Yi Chen's existence had more or less stimulated him. Now, he had converted more than half of his divine power. He had even met up with Yi Chen some time ago, so he was in a very good mood. I have to slowly build my foundation. Good preparation is the key to success. The eruption of power exhausted Yi Chen's potential. Yi Chen did not expect to achieve much in just a few million years. Those ultimate sword saints had all spent tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of years to cultivate and accumulate. If a primary demigod could live for more than 100 million years, a powerful demigod who had condensed divine power, could be said to have eternal life. They could live for at least 10 billion years. They had enough time to accumulate. After challenging the sword god Pagoda, Yi Chen successfully passed the 28th level and obtained 12.8 billion contribution points. He was only 4 levels away from becoming an ultimate sword saint. Although the contribution points were a lot, he knew that it was still not enough to exchange for the beginner sword Dao pattern. It should be known that the 1000th beginner sword Dao pattern required 100 million contribution points, and exchanging for 1/5 of a beginner sword Dao pattern would require an astronomical amount of contribution points. Tens of billions of contribution points were nothing to him. Hence, Yi Chen decided to head to the Twilight Plains again to search for divine stones and hunt for battle sages of the Divine Union. Chapter 1474. Boom boom boom. On the Twilight Plain, the sound waves shook the sky and the ground cracked. Two figures kept clashing, exchanging thousands of blows in an instant. Every time they clashed, a chaotic light would appear. One of the black figures was a battle sage demon with 2 horns on his head. His aura was very similar to the first demon ancestor, as if they came from the same source. The blue figure was Yi Chen. You have the bloodline of the great demon ancestor? During the battle, Yi Chen still had the energy to speak. The demon sneered, "That's right. In our demon god palace, everyone has the bloodline of the great demon ancestor. Our bloodline is the noblest, and I, demon saint, come from the powerful demon river universe." It wasn't only the black-yellow universe that had the bloodline of the great demon ancestor. Many universes had the bloodline of the great demon ancestor. I see. Yi Chen understood. In the black-yellow universe, the bloodline of the great demon ancestor was indeed a very powerful bloodline. However, in the demon god palace of the heaven realm, the bloodline of the great demon ancestor was only the most basic quality. If the first demon ancestor came to the heaven realm, he should have joined the demon god palace. This sky demon saint was very powerful. He was a high-level battle saint himself, and he had comprehended the darkness law and wind law. His realm was very high, much higher than even Sweet Dew Sword Saint. His divine power was even more frightening. His will and domain seemed to have reached perfection, transforming into divine power that was not inferior to Yi Chen's divine power. Most importantly, he had comprehended a mid-level divine skill. Fortunately, this mid-level divine skill was not perfected yet. Otherwise, Yi Chen would not be his opponent. The two fought for a day and a night, but there was still no winner. Demon Saint's advantage was that he had cultivated for a long time. Yi Chen's advantage was that he had comprehended the complementary 5 elements. Their advantages cancelled each other out. Demon Saint, I hope to see you again next time. Yi Chen did not want to fight anymore. After millions of years, he had accumulated a lot of power of the 5 elements. However, he did not want to waste it on a battle that he could not win. Don't go. Demon Saint chased after him. Unfortunately, Yi Chen's speed was much faster than his opponent. In a short while, he had left his opponent far behind. There were battles everywhere on the Twilight Plains. There were one-on-one fights, group fights, and even small-scale battles between gods. Everywhere was filled with the smoke of battle. 100,000 years had passed, and Yi Chen's battle achievements were bountiful. He had killed over 100 enemy intermediate battle saints and 7 advanced battle saints, earning over 10 billion contribution points. On this day, Yi Chen discovered a god stone pit. He didn't pay much attention to this sword before, but now that he looked deeper into it, he realized that the source of this sword contained the fragments of the 5 laws of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. It was rather perfect and formed a cycle. Yi Chen didn't know that demigods and heaven saint weapons were divided into different levels. Demigods who comprehended the complementary laws were elites among demigods. Heaven saint weapons that contained the complementary laws were elite heaven saint weapons. I'll call you 5-element sword. Since it contained the fragments of the 5 laws of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, it was much easier to give it a name. In for a penny, in for a pound. Yi Chen planned to upgrade the 5-element sword to the 6-star grade. With the quality of the 5-element sword, the success rate was very high. Yi Chen forcefully spat out a mouthful of turbid air and continued to fuse. The result made Yi Chen pleasantly surprised. The 5-element sword successfully upgraded to the 6-star grade. The process was rather smooth. What about the 7-star? Yi Chen felt that it was highly possible. A terrifying 5-colored light burst out, and the laws of the 5 elements intertwined. In Yi Chen's eyes, the 5-element sword suddenly rose to the 7-star grade. It was rather heavy in his hand, and it felt like he could split a primordial divine mountain in half. Break! With a low roar, Yi Chen slashed the ground in front of him. Kacha! A blue-colored sword light burst out, and a pitch-black hole appeared on the ground. The hole kept expanding and extended crazily, forming a small canyon. The hole that was closer to Yi Chen was narrow and deep, and the further away from Yi Chen the shallower the hole was. However, the width of the hole had increased by 1,000 times. It should be comparable to an 8-star Heaven Saint treasure sword, or even a 9-star. Yi Chen's face revealed a joyful expression. Although the 5-element sword was a 7-star Heaven Saint treasure sword, it contained the fragments of the laws of the 5 elements. When combined with the laws of the 5 elements that Yi Chen had, the power it could display was very terrifying. It definitely surpassed the 7-star Heaven Saint treasure. After all, Yi Chen was also someone who had seen a 7-star Heaven Saint treasure sword. He had even seen a 9-star Heaven Saint treasure sword before. There were many sword saints in the Sword God Palace who had a 9-star Heaven Saint treasure sword. This is a pleasant surprise. After losing the Firmament sword and obtaining the 5-element sword, Yi Chen didn't know whether he should be happy or worried. It should be both. Yi Chen estimated that his strength had increased by a small level. If he encountered the Sky Demon Saint again, he might not be able to do anything to him, but he could at least suppress him. Chapter 1475. Time passed by quickly. In the 3,600,000th year, Yi Chen had comprehended the first 50 elementary divine skills. In the 5 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the first 100 elementary divine skills. In the 5,500,000th year, Yi Chen had comprehended the 1 millionth elementary divine skill. In the 6 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the 1,100,000th elementary divine skill. In the 8 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the first 150 elementary divine skills. In the 10 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the first 200 elementary divine skills. In the 111 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the 1,172nd elementary divine skill, Sword Heart. This elementary divine skill was the last of the elementary divine skills, and it was also the most powerful one. Next, I can try to comprehend a mid-grade divine skill. Even the weakest mid-grade divine skill was still a mid-grade divine skill. Its power was not something a low-grade divine skill could compare to. After all these years, Yi Chen had already passed the 29th level of the Sword God Pagoda. He was only 3 levels away from becoming an ultimate sword sage. If he could comprehend a mid-grade divine skill, he might be able to pass the 30th level of the Sword God Pagoda, and his power would increase greatly. Of course, he was able to pass the 29th level not only because he had comprehended the last elementary divine skill, Sword Heart. It was also because after countless years, Yi Chen's nomological realm had improved a lot. The 5-elemental nomological realm was already close to phenomenal success. Once it reached phenomenal success, he would only be a step away from perfection. Furthermore, as the 5-elemental nomological realm improved, Yi Chen discovered that the quality of the 5 elemental swords was also improving. The 5 elemental nomological fragments inside were gradually becoming stronger. As it turned out, Yi Chen often imbued the 5 elemental nomological laws into the 5 elemental swords, causing the 5 elemental swords to form a direct connection with Yi Chen. As Yi Chen's 5 elemental nomological realm improved, the quality of the 5 elemental swords would also improve. Sensing that the 5 elemental swords could be upgraded to the 8-star level, Yi Chen did not think too much and imbued 10 divine stones into it. In the end, the 5-element sword was successfully upgraded to 8 stars, and it was only 1 step away from becoming a 9-star Sky Saint artifact. In the 13 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the first 250 primary godly skills. At this point, in terms of the number of primary godly skills that he had comprehended, Yi Chen was not inferior to Sword Saint Snowheart. Of course, Sword Saint Snowheart did not comprehend primary godly skills in order. Sword Saint Snowheart had also comprehended many of the lower-ranked primary godly skills. In the 150 million years, Yi Chen finally comprehended his first intermediate divine skill, the first intermediate divine skill, Thousand Eyes. Green Lotus Island. The Radiant Star Sword Sage, the Pill Cloud Sword Sage, the Sweet Dew Sword Sage, and the Shadowless Sword Sage had all arrived. They had already become good friends, often drinking, chatting, and sparring with each other. Green Lotus Sword Saint, I, the Shadowless Sword Saint, rarely admire people, but you are the one I admire. In just a short 10 million years, you have become the strongest amongst us and even far surpassed us. I can't help but admire you. The Shadowless Sword Saint sighed with emotion. Hearing this, the Sweet Dew Sword Saint nodded. the Shadowless Sword Saint is right. There are 3 people in the Sword God Palace that I admire the most. One is the Idealistic Sword Saint, the second is the Peerless Sword Saint, and the third is you. In comparison, the Idealistic Sword Saint and the Peerless Sword Saint are unable to reach your level in 10 million years. Yi Chen's monstrous level was simply shocking. Comprehending divine skills was as easy as eating and drinking. Among intermediate sword saints, there were very few who had comprehended more than 30 primary godly skills. Among advanced sword saints, there were very few who had comprehended more than 100 primary godly skills. However, Yi Chen had comprehended nearly 300 primary godly skills. It was truly admirable. I think Green Lotus Sword Saint might be able to break the record of the Sword God Palace and become the ultimate sword saint in the shortest time possible. The Bright Star Sword Saint smiled. It's highly possible. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint nodded. Yi Chen smiled. Everyone, you're too kind. I merely put all my effort into it. There's nothing else. Yi Chen did not pretend to be modest. It was true that he rarely paid attention to things that were unrelated to him. His life was very simple, and that was to constantly work hard to become stronger. Although the 4 of them held him in high esteem, he himself was not very satisfied. This was because he did not pass the 30th level of the Sword God Pagoda even though he had comprehended the first intermediate godly skill, Thousand Eyes. The later levels of the Sword God Pagoda could be said to be abnormal. Passing each level was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. It did not mean that one would be able to smoothly pass through the levels with just a little bit of improvement. One had to improve tremendously and have a qualitative breakthrough. In the 16th million year, Yi Chen's sword domain broke through to the 9th level of perfection. The divine power it transformed into was even stronger. It was no longer inferior to the divine power of an ultimate sword saint. After all, ultimate sword saints did not have 3 supreme sword intents. As the sword domain broke through to the 9th level of perfection, Yi Chen successfully passed through the 30th level of the Sword God Pagoda. He was only 2 levels away from becoming an ultimate sword saint. In the 17th million year, Yi Chen comprehended the 5th intermediate godly skill, Flourish. In the 20th million year, a godly battle erupted between the Sword God Deity Branch's Beast God and the Demonic God Deity Branch's Demonic Beast God. In the Myriad Beast Battlefield. This was an planar battlefield jointly opened up by the Beast God and the Demonic Beast God. The battlefield was vast and boundless. At this moment, there were tens of millions of battle sages fighting on the battlefield. Tens of thousands of battle sages were dying every moment. A godly battle was extremely tragic. Under normal circumstances, after a long and drawn-out godly battle, more than half of the battle sages on both sides would die. Hence, unless it was absolutely necessary, a godly battle would not break out easily. Once it did, it would be a battle to the death. As a member of the Beast God Valley, Su Jing naturally had to participate in the battle. In the past 20 million years she had also improved greatly. Unfortunately, in the Myriad Beast battlefield, she was still an ordinary member. She could be killed at any time. Yi Chen also participated in this godly battle. He had to participate. Otherwise it was very likely that Su Jing would die on the battlefield. Puff, 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 it was as if 1,000 eyes blinked in the sky. Dozens of demonic beast mountain battle sages were killed. This was the first intermediate godly skill, Thousand Eyes. The moment Thousand Eyes appeared, it was as if the Grim Reaper had opened 1,000 eyes. It's the Sword Saint of the Sword God Palace. Everyone follow me to kill him. Yi Chen's strength attracted countless attacks. The Sword Saint of the Sword God Palace was very famous in the Heaven domain. In terms of combat strength, if the Sword Saint of the Sword God Palace claimed to be the second strongest, no one would dare to claim to be the first. Of course, this was under the condition that their foundations were similar. Otherwise, even Yi Chen would not be able to withstand an ultimate battle sage. Boom boom boom. At least 100 intermediate and advanced battle sages joined forces to attack Yi Chen. Flourish. The moment the 5-element sword appeared, the void seemed to have become a kaleidoscope. Everything was twisted, folded, and shattered. Blood dyed the sky red. Over 100 enemy battle sages had died. Sword Saint of the Sword God Palace, die for me. Right at this time, a huge hammer smashed over from afar. This hammer was only a few meters long and was connected to a chain. However, when the hammer smashed over 1,000 battle sages of the Beast God Valley were smashed into meat paste. The might of this hammer was so great that it was terrifying to the extreme. Ultimate Battle Sage. Yi Chen narrowed his eyes. This was the first time he faced an ultimate battle sage head-on. Everyone retreat. Saying so, Yi Chen stood in front of them. Chapter 1476. Boom. A majestic wave of air came toward him, blowing Yi Chen's hair backward. The next moment, the hammer struck him like a meteor. With a clang, Yi Chen almost lost his grip on the five-element sword. His body froze there as if struck by lightning. A thousandth of a second later, he was sent flying backward, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Ultimate battle saints were too strong. If not for Yi Chen's divine power, which was not inferior to an ordinary ultimate battle saint, this hammer strike could have taken Yi Chen's life. Even so, Yi Chen clearly sensed that his martial yuan spirit was worn out. Although their divine powers were about the same, the opponent's comprehension of the laws was higher than Yi Chen's. It should be noted that the ultimate battle saint also comprehended the complementary laws. What? He only spat out a mouthful of blood. The nearby battle saints of Devil Beast Mountain were shocked. The giant hammer battle saint was an ultimate battle saint of Devil Beast Mountain. Although he was just an ordinary ultimate battle saint, an ultimate battle saint was still an ultimate battle saint. His divine power and comprehension of the laws had reached perfection. No one below the ultimate battle saint could stand a chance against him. His divine power is clearly not at perfection. Why is it so powerful? The giant hammer battle saint was a little puzzled. He was sure that Yi Chen's divine power was definitely not at perfection. This could not be hidden from him. However, its power was quite terrifying, especially its destructive power, which even surpassed his own divine power at perfection. Humph, let's see how many of my hammers you can block. The giant hammer battle saint swung his hammer at Yi Chen like a hot knife through butter. The hammer was like a meteor, and the hammer was like a divine mountain. It locked onto Yi Chen's figure from far away. It was extremely fierce. At this moment, a cold star pierced through the air. Clang. The hammer flew backward, out of the giant hammer battle saint's control. Giant hammer battle saint, your opponent is me. A clear and cold voice was heard. Yi Chen looked back and saw the cold star battle saint. The cold star battle saint was an ultimate battle saint of Beast God Valley. Count yourself lucky. The giant hammer battle saint glared at Yi Chen with a murderous look and clashed with the cold star battle saint. In the 22 million year, the war of the gods continued. The sword god systems barbarian god stronghold and the demon god systems Wuxia cave also joined the war of gods. In the 25 millionth year, the giant spiritual gods giant spiritual mountain and the evil gods evil spirit palace also joined the war of gods. The sword god divine branch and the demon god divine branch were at daggers drawn. Kill. 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 The battlefield had long since shifted from the myriad beast battlefield to the sword demon battlefield jointly opened by sword god and demon god. The sword fiend battlefield was a battlefield created by a sovereign, and not even the laws of primal chaos were able to invade it. 5 million years of battle had greatly benefited Yi Chen. Not only had he advanced from an intermediate sword saint to an advanced sword saint, but he had also managed to comprehend his 7th and 10th intermediate divine skills. Apart from this, his greatest gain was that his 5 elemental laws had reached the large success realm, and he was only a step away from perfection. The 5 elemental laws had reached the phenomenal stage, and the 5 elemental swords quality had risen along with it. In the end, it had become a 9-star heaven saint artifact. At this point, unless it was a divine artifact, there was no other heaven saint artifact that was stronger than the 5 elemental sword. At most, it would be on par with it. In the meantime, Yi Chen had also gone back to attempt the Divine Sword Pagoda. His current result was the 31st level of the Divine Sword Pagoda, and he was only 1 level away from becoming an ultimate sword saint. In the 30 million year, the number of factions that joined the War of the Gods had reached 10. In the 35 million year, the number of factions that joined the War of the Gods had reached 16. In the Sword Demon battlefield, smoke filled the air and corpses piled up like mountains. Clang, clang, clang. In a depression in the Sword Demon battlefield, an ultimate battle saint from the Wuxia cave was suppressing Yi Chen. Every time they exchanged blows, Yi Chen would be sent flying thousands of meters away. In the 15 million years since the start of the War of the Gods, Yi Chen had faced ultimate battle saints many times. The most dangerous time was when he was almost killed by an ultimate battle saint from the evil spirit palace. This ultimate battle saint from the Wuxia cave was about as strong as the giant hammer battle saint. He was not very terrifying, but he was still an ultimate battle saint. As time passed, he would still be in great danger. This ultimate battle saint from the Wuxia cave was called Battle Saint Yi He. His weapon was a trident. Since he could not kill Yi Chen in a short period of time, he was extremely violent, and each of his attacks was more domineering than the last. After dozens of attacks, Yi Chen could not help but spit out a large mouthful of blood. His martial soul had dimmed a little. Back then, the giant hammer battle saint had made him spit out blood with a single attack. This time he was much better. Earth Tyrant Heavenly Star. Suddenly, Battle Saint Yi He shot into the sky. In the next moment, his body spun, and a terrifying rotational force enveloped Yi Chen. The ground around Yi Chen was swept up, forming a huge ball of earth. It was like a small star and it wrapped around Yi Chen. This was Battle Saint Yi He's most powerful mid-grade divine technique. It was always effective against those weaker than him. Under this move, Yi Chen felt a strong sense of danger. It was as if countless tridents were stabbing at him from all directions. There was no way to block or dodge. Am I going to be heavily injured? Yi Chen frowned. His martial soul had been heavily injured, and it would take a long time to recover. Moreover, the divinity battle was in full swing, and he could not afford to rest. The strong sense of danger caused Yi Chen's many years of accumulation to erupt once more. In his soul sea, the three supreme sword souls vibrated wildly, resonating with each other. But time seemed to slow down thousands of times. Yi Chen's eyes swirled with black, white, and gold. Boom. With a slash of his sword, the ball of earth was split in half, and Yi Chen escaped. Battle Saint Yi He could not believe that his ultimate technique had been broken. It had to be known that this technique could only be broken by ultimate battle saints of the same level. This godly power? Sensing the change in Yi Chen's godly power, Battle Saint Yi He was bewildered. Yi Chen's godly power was too strong, even stronger than his own. How could he know that Yi Chen's three supreme sword souls had all broken through to the peak of the ninth order in this crisis? At this point, Yi Chen's godly power had surpassed that of an ordinary consummate divine force. Moreover, he had two more supreme sword intents than an ordinary consummate divine force. This completely negated Battle Saint Yi He's advantage of having a higher cultivation level. I don't believe it. Battle Saint Yi He once again charged at Yi Chen. Boom. The earth trembled and a violent shockwave radiated in all directions. Battle Saint Yi He and Yi Chen were both sent flying. Both sides were evenly matched. Impossible. Battle Saint Yi He could not accept this reality, and he attacked Yi Chen again and again. Unfortunately, each time he failed, he could not do anything to Yi Chen. Yi Chen's current strength had already reached the level of an ordinary ultimate battle saint. Of course, Yi Chen estimated that he was still quite a bit weaker than an ordinary ultimate sword saint. This was because ultimate battle saints were formed from the light of the soul, while ultimate sword saints were formed from the sword of the soul. The latter was stronger and more offensive. The reason why Yi Chen was able to block out one attack from the giant hammer battle saint and dozens of attacks from the Yi He battle saint before was because he was a sword saint. Otherwise, if it were a battle saint with the same quality as him, they would not be able to block it out. The sword saints of the sword god's palace were invincible under the same conditions. One more step and my godly power will be perfect. Perfect divine power had to meet these conditions. The cultivation of an advanced sword saint, the inextinguishable power of a perfect spirit body, perfect sword intent, perfect sword domain, and so on. In short, all kinds of power had to be perfect. And the perfect divine power of an ultimate sword saint was a level higher than that of an ultimate battle saint. In terms of godly power, Yi Chen's current godly power should be similar to that of an ordinary ultimate sword saint. Unfortunately, he was lacking in other aspects. Against an ordinary ultimate battle saint, however, Yi Chen could use his godly power to make up for his lack of cultivation level. Chapter 1477. It had been 40 million years since Yi Chen had arrived in the heaven realm, and it had been 20 million years since the God War had erupted. The conflict between the Sword God Divine System and the Demon God Divine System had erupted, and the Sword God Palace's Sword Saints and Demon God Palace's Battle Saints had joined the God War. The Sword Demon battlefield could no longer withstand the endless destruction and was banished to the Twilight Plane by the law of primal chaos. The Twilight Plains became the battleground for the Sword God Pantheon and the Demon God Pantheon. The battle saints of the other main god pantheons did not step into the Twilight Plains as they did not want to get involved in the God War. That kind of situation was not something that a single force could contend against, unless an all-out God War broke out in the heaven realm. Kill them all? The Sword God Palace is invincible. The Demon God Palace is invincible. On the Twilight Plains, hundreds of millions of battle saints were engaged in a fierce battle. Among them, the Sword God's Palace and the Demon God's Palace had the fewest people, but their battle prowess was the strongest. This was especially true for the Sword God's Palace. They only had a few million sword saints, but wherever they went they were like a hot knife through butter. This was especially true for the group of sword saints led by the ultimate sword saint. They were like monsters, rampaging and unstoppable. Battle sages were not made of steel. Even if they were made of steel, there would still be a day when they would rust and collapse. Therefore, after a long period of time, any battle sage had the right to apply for a chance to rest. Taking advantage of the time to rest, Yi Chen worked hard to comprehend the divine skills. As long as he could comprehend the divine skills, he would be able to refine them through killing and perfecting them. It would be faster and more direct than usual. Right now, Yi Chen had already comprehended 600 beginner-level god skills and 7 intermediate-level god skills. He was ranked in the middle of the ultimate sword saints and was even better than sword saint Snowheart and other ultimate sword saints. Of course, in terms of strength, Yi Chen was still the weakest ultimate sword saint. Ultimate sword saints were simply too strong. Other than Yi Chen, even the most ordinary ultimate sword saint was equivalent to an intermediate ultimate battle saint from a true god faction. Ordinary ultimate battle sages like the Giant Hammer battle sage and the Nightwell battle sage were no match for an ordinary ultimate sword sage. The 8th mid-level godly skill. On this day Yi Chen comprehended another mid-level godly skill, Sword Essence. This was the 21st mid-level godly skill. It was also the 8th intermediate godly skill that Yi Chen had comprehended. Twilight Plains. Yi Chen met up with the Sword Saint of Sword God Palace. Su Jing and Murong Qingqing were still in Beast God Valley and Ancient Fragrant Castle. They were beginner battle saints, so they had more time to rest and strengthen themselves. On the battlefield, beginner battle saints were just cannon fodder. There was not much difference if they were present or not, so their rest time was relatively more relaxed. Green Lotus Sword Saint. The Sweet Dew Sword Saint, the Shadowless Sword Saint, the Radiant Star Sword Saint, and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint approached. "How's the situation?" Yi Chen asked. The Shadowless Sword Saint frowned. "The situation isn't very optimistic. Although the Sword Saints of our Sword God Palace are unparalleled, the Battle Saints of Demon Celestial Palace can't be underestimated. Especially when they obtained a bloodline divine skill that allows them to combine their Battle Saints in pairs, up to 6. Furthermore, the Demon Celestial Palace has several times more members than us." Bloodline skill? Yi Chen looked ahead. On the vast plains, divine power and laws intertwined. Yi Chen easily found the Battle Saints of Demon Celestial Palace. The Battle Saints of Demon Celestial Palace were Battle Saints of main god forces after all. Their strength was higher than Battle Saints of true god forces, second only to the Sword Saint of Sword God Palace. Because they both had the bloodline of Great Demon King, the aura of the Battle Saints of Demon Celestial Palace was very similar. Yi Chen immediately saw 2 Battle Saints fusing into one, becoming a gigantic unfamiliar Battle Saint. This is the bloodline divine skill? Yi Chen didn't understand. Sweet Dew Sword Saint explained, "Not all Battle Saints of Demon Celestial Palace can fuse together. There seems to be some conditions that need to be met. Unfortunately, the God Wars happened too quickly. We didn't get any information about this, so we don't know what the key to the bloodline divine skill is. Plus, only Demon Celestial Palace can use the bloodline divine skill. Even if we know the secret, we probably can't do anything about it." "Yes." Bright Star Sword Saint and Red Cloud Sword Saint nodded. This should be the work of the demon god. Yi Chen guessed in his heart. Demon Celestial Palace was different from other true god forces or main god forces. The members of Demon Celestial Palace all had the bloodline of the Great Demon King. This was very ridiculous. If it was just an ordinary bloodline, then it wouldn't be a big deal. However, the Great Demon King bloodline was the pinnacle of bloodlines. No one knew how the demon god created this bloodline. Perhaps he discovered some secret in the primal chaos and created the Great Demon King bloodline. Now he even researched a bloodline divine skill based on the Great Demon King bloodline. In front of them, the sky was filled with multicolored light. It was like the rising sun but also like the setting sun. This was godly power. The godly power that belonged to the Dawn Spirit Sword Saint. The Dawn Spirit Sword Saint was one of the Sword God Palace's ultimate sword saints. She was very powerful and had already reached the 34th floor of the Sword God Pagoda. Her godly power was fused with countless spirit clouds and was called the Dawn Spirit Godly Power. The Dawn Spirit Sword Saint's opponent was a bloodline divine warrior formed by the fusion of 1 Demon Celestial Palace's ultimate battle saint and 5 Demon Celestial Palace's advanced battle saints. The bloodline divine warrior was extremely powerful and had a huge body. Even their heavenly saint weapons had fused together, turning into a giant mace that seemed to be formed from a living creature. The mace had a huge mouth that could spit out a terrifying tongue. In a moment of carelessness, the Dawn Spirit Sword Saint's shoulder was pierced by the tongue in the mace's huge mouth. Her entire body was flung away and smashed into the bodies of 3 Sword Saints. These 3 advanced Sword Saints did not even have the chance to make a sound before they exploded on the spot. Haha. Come on. Who will fight me? The Bloodline Divine Warrior swept the mace with a ferocious expression. He was invincible, and the Sword Saints in his path were all turned into meat paste. In the sky outside the Twilight Plain, the 7 suns were especially dazzling. When did that demon god create a bloodline divine skill based on the great demon king's bloodline? What a surprise. Above the sun of destruction, a voice quietly whispered. The faint tone contained the taste of destruction. I knew that demon god was not so simple. He must have discovered something amazing while roaming the primal chaos. I'm afraid that Sword God is going to lose this time. Sword God has traveled the universe unhindered. His origins are unknown. Perhaps he had already anticipated this situation. That's why he has not shown himself for countless years. He should be looking for an opportunity. On the Sun of Chaos, an old man with an ancient face sat cross-legged. Beside him were 2 children. Teacher, is Sword God going to lose? The child on the left mustered up his courage and asked. The old man neither shook his head nor nodded. Everything is destined. There is no need to speculate. Let's just keep watching. The Dawn Spirit Sword Saint was about to stand up and fight again when a hand pressed her down. Go find another opponent. Leave him to me. The voice was gentle, making one feel unprecedentedly relaxed. At the same time, one's confidence was restored. Limitless Sword Saint. The Dawn Spirit Sword Saint nodded and turned to leave. This bloodline divine warrior charged toward Limitless Sword Saint. With a gentle smile on his face, Limitless Sword Saint pointed out with a finger. Like a leaking balloon, the bloodline divine warrior rapidly shriveled and then exploded into ashes. Limitless Sword Saint, one of the 2 strongest ultimate Sword Saints of Sword God Palace. Chapter 1478. The Peerless Sword Sage is here. Great. With the Peerless Sword Sage here, the bloodline battle sages of the Demon God Palace are nothing. The appearance of the Peerless Sword Sage boosted the confidence of the Sword Sages of the Sword God Palace. A long time ago, the idealistic Sword Sage and the Peerless Sword Sage had become the symbols of the Sword God Palace. The idealistic Sword Sage was elusive and no one knew who he was. Legend had it that the idealistic Sword Sage could transform into any Sword Sage. He could transform into an ultimate Sword Sage or an ordinary Sword Sage. If he didn't want to be exposed, no one could find him. Of course, the main gods and true gods were exceptions. Excluding the mysterious idealistic Sword Sage, the Peerless Sword Sage was undoubtedly the backbone of the Sword God Palace. With him around, everything could be solved. In the past divine wars, the Peerless Sword Sage had led the Sword Sages of the Sword God Palace to defeat the Demon God Palace several times. Although the Bloodline Battle Sages were strong, they were definitely no match for the Peerless Sword Sage. In a short time, the Peerless Sword Sage had killed 7 or 8 Bloodline Battle Sages. How can he be so strong? While fighting, Yi Chen was observing Sword Saint's movements. Seeing this, he couldn't help but feel astonished. If the Peerless Sword Sage had gone all out, it would have been fine. However, the Peerless Sword Sage was just strolling around leisurely. When he encountered a Bloodline Battle Sage, the other party would immediately explode. The Du Sword Sage explained, the Peerless Sword Sage is the second Sword Sage in the Sword God Palace besides the idealistic Sword Sage to comprehend a high-level divine skill. There are only 3 high-level divine skills in the Sword God Palace. Comprehending any one of them is enough to be invincible. It is said that the Peerless Sword Sage comprehended the first high-level Sword Dao skill, Unhindered Sword Heart. Unhindered Sword Heart? Yi Chen savored this term. Usually, Unhindered Sword Chi, Unhindered Saber Chi, and Unhindered Battle Strength represented tyrannical strength. The Unhindered Sword Heart was more reserved. It wasn't just about strength but also a strong heart. A strong heart would usually lead to strong strength. This was strength coming from within. A true Sword Sage should have an unhindered sword heart. Yi Chen thought so. Peerless Sword Sage, we haven't fought for more than 1 billion years. Let me see how strong you are. In the distance, a silhouette shot over. It was a Demon God Palace Ultimate Battle Saint with a pair of dragon wings and a body covered in scales. Demon Sage Dragon Scale. The Limitless Sword Saint looked over. The Dragon Scale Demon Sage was the #1 Ultimate Battle Sage of the Demon God Palace. His status was equivalent to the idealistic sword sage of the Sword God Palace. Of course, in terms of strength, the Dragon Scale Demon Sage was no match for the idealistic Sword Sage. He was also slightly weaker than the Peerless Sword Sage. It's the Dragon Scale Demon Sage. The members of the Sword God Palace paled slightly. Although they had the unparalleled Sword Sage to deal with the Dragon Scale Battle Sage, the Demonic Sage was still a godlike existence to them. Boom. As soon as Limitless Sword Saint and Dragon Scale Demon Saint clashed, they immediately caused a huge explosion. The violent shockwave blew away all the Sword Saints and Battle Sages within 100 miles. Some Sword Saints and Battle Sages were turned into ashes in the air. So powerful. Yi Qin and the others were also affected. Fortunately, they were far away and were only sent flying. The Dragon Scale Demon Sage's attack was majestic and magnificent. Those who were weak would be weakened by a level before they even started fighting. On the other hand, the unparalleled Sword Sage remained calm. However, a sword appeared in his hand. When he swung the sword chi was calm, but its power was not weak at all. The crisscrossing sword heart was not a simple move. It was more like an inner strength. Wherever the two went, ravines were created and the sound waves shook the sky. Fortunately, the Dragon Scale Demon Sage seems to be unable to use his bloodline skill and fuse with the other Demon God Palace Battle Sages to form a bloodline Battle Sage. The Sword Saint of the Sword God Palace who was watching the battle heaved a sigh of relief. Haha, we meet again. Die. Just as Yi Qin was paying attention to the battle between the unparalleled Sword Sage and the Dragon Scale Demon Sage, a figure pounced over. It was the Demon God Palace's Sky Demon Sage. After 20 million years, the Sky Demon Sage's strength had improved a lot. Back then, he was only at the Divine Power Perfection realm and did not comprehend the complementary nomological laws. What he comprehended were the Dark Laws and the Wind Laws. After 20 million years, the Sky Demon Sage comprehended the Light Laws, which combined with the Dark Laws to form the complementary laws of light and darkness. His strength had increased by more than 100 or even 1,000 times. Seeing Yi Qin on the battlefield, the Sky Demon Sage laughed wildly in his heart. In his opinion, after 20 million years, no matter how much Yi Qin had improved, he would not be as strong as him. This time it was time for him to die. Oh, it seems like you are very confident. Yi Qin did not waste time and started to fight with the Sky Demon Sage. I see. Yi Qin roughly estimated the Sky Demon Sage's strength. Indeed, he was many times stronger than he was in the past. Unfortunately, things were different now. Yi Qin had improved a lot. The Sky Demon Sage was extremely shocked that he could not suppress Yi Qin. How was this possible? I think you are the one who will die. Yi Qin no longer suppressed his strength and attacked the Sky Demon Sage with all his might. In terms of divine power, Yi Qin's divine power was at the level of an ordinary Ultimate Sword Saint, while the Sky Demon Sage's divine power was at the level of an ordinary Ultimate Battle Saint. In terms of laws, although the Sky Demon Sage comprehended the Light Laws, it was a pity that the Light Laws had not reached the Great Accomplishment realm. When combined with the Darkness Laws, it was not truly perfect and could not compare to Yi Qin's Great Accomplishment 5 Elements Laws. In terms of divine skills, Yi Qin had already comprehended the 21st mid-level divine skill, the Sword Essence, while the Sky Demon Sage seemed to have only comprehended 3 or 4 mid-level divine skills. Regardless of which aspect, Yi Qin had surpassed the Sky Demon Sage. As soon as the Sword Essence appeared, a wide sword chi appeared. With a swoosh, it brushed past the Sky Demon Sage's body. The Sky Demon Sage was immediately turned into a bloody mist. Now it was difficult for Yi Qin to find a match for anyone below the Ultimate Battle Saint realm. Originally, everyone thought that the Divine War would continue for tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of years. Unexpectedly, after a short few hundred years, the Divine War came to an abrupt end. Both sides received divine decrees from the true gods to stop the Divine War. Green Lotus Island. Normally, a Divine War is stopped in preparation for the Ultimate War. The Sweet Dew Sword Saint looked pensive. Ultimate War? Yi Qin looked over. The Sweet Dew Sword Saint explained, our Sword God Divine System and Demon God Divine System have experienced countless battles between gods over the countless years, but there aren't many ultimate battles. In every ultimate battle, not only will countless battle sages fall, even true gods will participate in the battle. Occasionally true gods will also fall. Before the ultimate battle arrives, we must increase our strength with all our might. Otherwise, when the ultimate battle begins, no one will be able to guarantee their own safety. Only by becoming stronger will we have a higher chance of survival. What about the core gods? Yi Chen asked. The shadowless sword saint frowned and said, "Normally, core gods will not participate in the battle because the battle between core gods is too terrifying. Of course, core gods may fight in the chaos outside the heaven realm, but we do not know." Chapter 1479. Time passed quickly. It had been 60 million years since Yi Chen came to the heaven realm. The War of Gods had already ended 20 million years ago. Most people who didn't know the inside story thought that there would be no more War of Gods. They gradually forgot about the tragic battle 20 million years ago. During these 20 million years, Yi Chen never stopped improving. He improved faster and faster. In these 20 million years, Yi Chen had comprehended 800 low-grade skills and 20 mid-grade skills. There was a rumor in the Sword God Palace that if one wanted to comprehend an advanced divine skill, they had to comprehend all the basic and intermediate divine skills. Only then would they have a chance to comprehend an advanced divine skill. The idealistic Sword Saint and the limitless Sword Saint were one of the representatives. The two of them had comprehended all the basic and intermediate divine skills long ago. Yi Chen was still very far away from this goal, thousands of miles away from it. In these 80 million years, he had comprehended 1,000 low-grade skills and 30 mid-grade skills. In 82 million years, Yi Chen's 5 elemental laws finally reached perfection. Is this the perfection of the complementary laws? In his soul sea, the 5 laws of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth were perfect without any flaws. A 5-colored whirlpool appeared between the 5 laws. The speed at which the laws of 5 were produced increased by 100 times. As the laws of 5 reached perfection, Yi Chen felt that the restrictions of the heaven realm's primal chaos laws on him had lessened. If I can achieve God laws, the primal chaos laws shouldn't restrict me anymore. Instead, I can resist the primal chaos laws to a certain extent. When I become an overgod, I can even make the primal chaos laws retreat. Overgods were the kings of true gods. Ordinary true gods were still in great danger when roaming the primal chaos. Only overgods rarely encountered danger. Overgods could only be trapped and couldn't be killed. Even the supreme overgod, the chaos overgod, and the primal chaos laws could not kill an overgod. Of course, trapping an overgod for countless years was equivalent to imprisoning an overgod. Thus, the chaos overgod was a transcendent existence in the heaven realm and the endless primal chaos. He never participated in the god wars, but no overgod dared to challenge his authority. The 5 elemental laws reached perfection. Yi Chen successfully passed the 32nd level of the Sword God Pagoda. Only now could he be considered an ultimate sword saint. Before this, he had only been an ultimate battle saint, much weaker than an ultimate sword saint. Of course, there were strong and weak ultimate sword saints as well. Yi Chen was one of the stronger ordinary ultimate sword saints. After all, Yi Chen had already comprehended 20 mid-level divine techniques, while most ordinary ultimate sword saints had only comprehended 10 or so mid-level divine techniques. After 100 million years, Yi Chen finally comprehended all of the primary divine skills. 120 million years later, Yi Chen had comprehended 40 types of mid-level divine skills. In the 150 million years, Yi Chen had comprehended 49 types of mid-level godly skills and was only missing one mid-level godly skill. Meanwhile, Yi Chen had passed the 33rd level of the Sword God Pagoda. Just a little bit more and I'll be able to pass the 34th floor. Middle-grade godly skills increased one's strength by too much. The 49th type of middle-grade godly skill was extremely powerful. It was countless times more powerful than the previous middle-grade godly skills. In the 155 million years later, Yi Chen's hard work paid off. He naturally comprehended the 50th type of mid-level godly skill, Rampage. The last primary divine skill is Sword Heart, the last mid-level godly skill is Rampage, and the first high-level godly skill is Sword Heart Rampage. Could these 3 be related? These names were not intentionally given by Yi Chen. In fact, the last primary divine skill was originally called Sword Heart, and the last mid-level godly skill was originally called Rampage. The 3 high-level godly skills also had their own names. Of course, although the names were the same, they were still different when used by different people. The name should be what gave them meaning, not what they looked like. After comprehending Rampage, Yi Chen went to challenge the Sword God Pagoda again. Rampage. With a swing of his sword, the Sword Saint puppet on the 34th level of the Sword God Pagoda seemed to be frozen in place. An unparalleled sword aura swept across its body, leaving behind thousands of fragments. Following that, the fragments were turned into ashes. He passed the 34th level of the Sword God Pagoda. In the 160th million years later, a war broke out again. This time it was an all-out war. The Sword God Celestial System and the Demon Celestial System were all mobilized. In the sky, the Sword God Celestial System and the Demon Celestial System's True God stars also started to approach the Twilight Plane. Once they got close, it would be the time for the True God battle. In the Twilight Plane, blood dyed the ground and corpses piled up like mountains. Hundreds of millions of battle sages fought against each other. Everyone seemed to have gone crazy, and all of them were unafraid of death. What a terrifying battlefield atmosphere. Yi Chen couldn't help but change his expression. He could feel that the Twilight Plane was enveloped by a terrifying battlefield atmosphere. Anyone who entered would be affected, and the affected battle sages would no longer fear death. His good friends, the Sweet Dew Sword Saint, the Shadowless Sword Saint, the Radiant Star Sword Saint, and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint, were affected, and their eyes turned blood red. Only the Ultimate Battle Sages and Ultimate Sword Saints were not affected, or were only slightly affected. This is the ultimate divine battle? Yi Chen seemed to see everyone's dusk, and it was extremely miserable. Raising his head, Yi Chen saw the True God stars. One had to know that in the past, the Twilight Plane had never seen the sun or the True God stars. Then let's kill. A divine battle was fate, and it was also the shortcut to becoming a true god. There were no other techniques. Every time Yi Chen used his sword, it would be the strongest mid-level divine technique, Rampage. Unparalleled sword chi swept past, and a river of blood appeared in front of him. It was unknown how many Demon Celestial System battle sages died at the hands of Yi Chen. It's him? In the distance, Battle Sage Yi saw Yi Chen. Without any hesitation, Battle Sage Yi immediately turned and fled. At this moment he was no match for Yi Chen. As an ultimate battle sage, he would not be affected by the atmosphere of the battlefield. Do you think you can escape? With a flash of sword light, Yi Chen arrived in the air above Battle Sage Yi and swept his sword down. Boom! Battle Sage Yi was dead. In the following years, Yi Chen killed the ultimate battle sage of Demonic Beast Mountain, Giant Hammer Battle Sage. Back then, these two ultimate battle sages were above Yi Chen, but now they could not even take a single strike from Yi Chen. After passing the 34th level of the Sword God Pagoda, Yi Chen was 2 levels stronger than ordinary ultimate sword sages and 3 levels stronger than ordinary ultimate battle sages. They were not on the same level at all. The situation became more and more desperate. Even the ultimate sword sages of Sword God Palace were in danger. After more than 100 million years, the number of battle sages of Demon Celestial Palace with Bloodline God skills had increased. In Yi Chen's vision, 2 ultimate sword sages were in danger. One was Sword Sage Snowheart, and the other was Sword Sage Lianqing. Sword Sage Snowheart had once saved Yi Chen's life. Sword Sage Lianqing did not have much interaction with Yi Chen. I can only save one. Yi Chen frowned. His figure flashed, and he flew in the direction of Sword Sage Snowheart. Between the two, he could only choose Sword Sage Snowheart. Be careful. Seeing that Yi Chen was coming to help, Sword Sage Snowheart hurriedly reminded him. Her opponent was not an ordinary ultimate battle sage, but a bloodline battle sage. You saved my life back then. Now I'm returning the favor. I still owe you one more life. Yi Chen turned around and smiled at Sword Sage Snowheart. He charged toward the bloodline battle sage. With a flash of sword chi, the bloodline battle sage was split into 2. The strength of a bloodline battle sage depended on how strong they were before the fusion. Interesting. Sword Sage Snowheart smiled. After this ultimate battle, perhaps another idealistic sword sage and peerless sword sage would be born. Chapter 1480. Yi Chen, who had perfected the 5 elemental laws and comprehended the final mid-grade divine skill, Rampage, was too powerful. Even in the Sword God Palace he was one of the top existences. The ultimate sword saints of the Sword God Palace were usually divided into 4 levels. The first level was the idealistic sword saint and the invincible sword saint. The second level was the level of Yi Chen. The third level was the mid-grade ultimate sword saint, such as the Sunset Spirit Sword Saint. The fourth level was the ordinary ultimate sword saint, such as the Snow Heart Sword Saint. Of course, there were still differences between the same level. For example, the gap between the idealistic sword saint and the invincible sword saint was huge. According to the invincible sword saint, he couldn't even block one strike from the idealistic sword saint. Even though he was being humble, the idealistic sword saint was indeed very powerful. Otherwise, there was no need for the invincible sword saint to praise others and belittle himself. At the rear of the battlefield, Su Jing and Murong Qingqing were also participating in the battle. There were also some familiar faces like Duguju. They had already become mid-grade demigods. In the Heaven Realm their innate talent was very good. However, in the Heaven Realm, their innate talent was only ordinary. Without a fated encounter, it would take them a long time to break through to the next level. It was already very difficult for them to become mid-grade demigods. They couldn't improve rapidly like Yi Qin. Although Su Jing and Murong Qingqing were only mid-grade demigods, which were mid-grade battle sages, they were fully armed. They were wearing 9-star Sky Saint armor and holding 9-star Sky Saint weapons. In the past it was extremely difficult for him to obtain divine stones. But now with his strength he didn't lack divine stones at all, let alone contribution points. Wanting to obtain a few 9-star Sky Saint artifacts was as easy as eating and drinking. Besides, the most important thing was that the two of them were pregnant with Yi Chen's child. A demigod's pregnancy required a long time, unlike a mortal's 10 months. A low-grade demigod's pregnancy required at least 1,000,000 years, and a mid-grade demigod's pregnancy required 10 million years. Having Yi Chen's child was equivalent to having Yi Chen's bloodline. This bloodline would protect the two of them at a critical moment. With this, Yi Chen could rest assured that they would stay at the rear of the battlefield. King against king, general against general, soldier against soldier. The situation on the Twilight Plains had reached a stalemate. Apart from the countless battle sages and sword sages who had fallen in the beginning, the rate of deaths had actually slowed down. After all, in a situation where both sides were evenly matched, it would take a long time to finish off the other side. It could take a day or two or even 10 days or half a month. Once he got rid of his opponent, there would be another massacre until he found a second opponent. In the center of the Twilight Plains this was the grandest battlefield. Even the weakest of those who could fight here were ordinary ultimate battle saints. This was because the top forces of both sides were gathered here. Everyone understood that as long as the top forces of the other side were taken care of, no matter how many of them there were, they would all be useless. Green Lotus Sword Saint, let's join forces. The one who spoke was the Black Rock Sword Saint. The Black Rock Sword Saint was the same as Yi Chen, a second-tier ultimate sword saint. He was slightly weaker than Yi Chen but not by much. He had already comprehended 45 mid-tier divine skills. All right. Yi Chen nodded. Their opponent was a bloodline battle saint. It was a fusion of 2 intermediate ultimate battle saints and 2 ordinary ultimate battle saints. Its strength was even stronger than Yi Chen's. Haha, we have directly fused together. You are just cooperating with each other. How can you be a match for us? The bloodline battle saint swooped down, plowing a deep trench in the ground. Go! Yi Chen and the Black Rock Sword Saint charged forward, one on the left and one on the right. The first to attack was the Black Rock Sword Saint. He raised his black greatsword high and slashed out. Black Sword Chi strangled the bloodline battle saint's body like a millstone. However, the bloodline battle saint's defense was too strong. When the Sword Chi strangled the bloodline battle saint, it only produced countless sparks, not even a white mark. However, it was not completely useless. At least it slowed down the bloodline battle saint and caused him to pause. Crisscross. Holding the 5-element sword, Yi Chen slashed out, and an unparalleled sword chi brushed past the bloodline battle saint's body. Boom. A large amount of blood flew out. The bloodline battle saint was injured. In terms of attack power, Yi Chen was much stronger than the Black Rock Sword Saint. After all, Yi Chen had comprehended the last intermediate divine skill. Damn it, Great Destruction Axe. The bloodline battle saint's weapon was a blood-red axe. With a swing of the axe light split the sky and the earth. The Black Rock Sword Saint was directly sent flying, and Yi Chen was also forced to retreat. The ground was a mess. Fusion is indeed not something that can be matched by cooperation. Yi Chen frowned slightly. Fusion was a superposition of strength, and it was already amazing that the cooperation could double the effect. The bloodline battle saint was only slightly stronger than Yi Chen. He thought that with the Black Rock Sword Saint, they should be able to contend, but they were still slightly weaker. Die. The bloodline battle saint's attack became more and more violent, not giving the two a chance to fight back. The Black Rock Sword Saint spat out blood continuously, and his primordial spirit was injured. Yi Chen could hold on, but unfortunately he could not find a chance to defeat his opponent. With his attack power, it would be very difficult for him to defeat his opponent. His full-strength attack could only injure his opponent slightly. Of course, he was not weak either, and it would be difficult for his opponent to injure him. Black Rock Sword Saint, step back. Leave this to me. The Green Lotus Sword Saint said to the Black Rock Sword Saint. Okay. Although the Black Rock Sword Saint was very unhappy, he knew that it was useless for him to stay. Since even the Black Rock Sword Saint could not help him, there was almost no one else who could help him. It was useless to rely on more people. After all, he was not the only one in trouble. The Bloodline Battle Saint of the Demon God Palace was indeed a trump card, enough to change the direction of the God Wars. Haha, when we fuse together, our endurance is beyond your imagination. Let's see how long you can last. The Bloodline Battle Saint laughed wildly. 1 week passed. 1 month passed. Yi Chen was gradually losing. In the blink of an eye, 1 year passed. This was the longest battle that Yi Chen had ever experienced. Yi Chen's mouth was bleeding, and his primordial spirit was beginning to be injured. Die. Die. Die, die, die. The Bloodline Battle Saint was suppressing Yi Chen. It's not certain who will die. An astonishing sword intent suddenly erupted from Yi Chen's body. It was not just one sword intent but 3. The 3 supreme sword intents intertwined, creating an unprecedented resonance. A year of difficult battles had once again allowed Yi Chen's potential to explode. It should be known that the 3 supreme sword intents were resonating all the time, but their progress was getting slower and slower. However, after more than 100 million years, the 3 supreme sword intents were gradually approaching perfection. All they needed was an opportunity to temper themselves. Boom. Finally, the 3 supreme sword intents broke through to perfection and merged with his divine power, causing Yi Chen's divine power to be strengthened countless times. Before this, Yi Chen's divine power was already at the level of an ultimate sword saint. At this time, Yi Chen's divine power had surpassed that of an ultimate sword saint. This was because no ultimate sword saint had 3 supreme sword intents. At most, they had 2, such as the solitary sword saint and the absolute sword saint. His sword intents had reached perfection, and so had Yi Chen's divine power. Coupled with the 5 elemental laws, the current Yi Chen was truly an ultimate sword saint. Chapter 1481. It was still a mid-level divine skill, but this time, it was more than 10,000 times stronger than before. The broadsword chi seemed to be able to destroy the world as it swept along the body of the Bloodline Battle Saint. Without a sound, the body of the Bloodline Battle Saint was annihilated into nothingness. However, this was not the end. The remaining sword chi was still extremely terrifying. It swept in a straight line, and wherever it went, everything was annihilated. It was hazy and even time and space were distorted. So powerful. Even the Supreme Sword Saint is only this powerful. This is too domineering. The Supreme Sword Saint is superior in his advanced divine skill, and the Green Lotus Sword Saint is superior in his terrifying divine power. This divine power is unimaginable. How can a Sword Saint have such a domineering divine power? The Sword Saints of the Sword God Palace were surprised. The rise of the Green Lotus Sword Saint gave them a higher chance of winning. From now on, the Sword God Palace would have 3 ultimate Sword Saints: the Idealistic Sword Saint, the Supreme Sword Saint, and the Green Lotus Sword Saint. Buff, 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 buff. Yi Chen, whose strength had greatly increased, was invincible. Basically, no one was his match. Dang. Dazzling sparks soared into the sky. Yi Chen's attack was blocked. The one who attacked was a Sword Saint, one of the 2 ultimate battle saints of the Demon God Palace, the Demon Sword Saint. The Dragon Scale Demon Saint was only slightly weaker than the Supreme Sword Saint, and the Demon Sword Saint was slightly weaker than the Dragon Scale Demon Saint. Yi Chen's strength would not exceed the Supreme Sword Saint's, so the strength of the 4 was about the same. Dark Sword Intent and Light Sword Intent. Yi Chen immediately determined that the Demon Sword Saint had comprehended the Supreme Sword Intent, Dark Sword Intent, and Light Sword Intent. There were 5 types of Supreme Sword Intents: destruction, immortality, darkness, light, and chaos. Yi Chen had already comprehended the 3 supreme sword intents: destruction, immortality, and light. He only lacked 2 supreme sword intents: darkness and chaos. Chaos sword intent was the most special. It existed between destruction, immortality, darkness, and light. It didn't have any specific attribute because it was chaos itself. Therefore, once he comprehended the chaos sword intent in advance, he wouldn't be able to comprehend the previous 4 supreme sword intents. To a certain extent, it was the opposite of the previous 4 supreme sword intents. It represented disorder and the collapse of order. On the other hand, the dark sword intent and the light sword intent were opposites. The light sword intent could see through all secrets, while the dark sword intent could hide all secrets. If one could comprehend both sword intents at the same time, others would no longer be able to sense the trajectory of one's attacks. The demonic sword saint's attack was so sudden that even Yi Chen was taken aback. Of course, Yi Chen was only surprised for a moment. The other party had the darkness sword intent and the radiant sword intent, and he was stronger than the other party, having comprehended the destruction, immortality, and radiant sword intents. There was no need for him to fear the other party. Dang dang dang. Dazzling sparks flashed in the sky, and the two figures seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Is this the darkness sword intent? In the process of fighting, Yi Chen carefully sensed the uniqueness of the darkness sword intent. He wanted to borrow the demonic sword saint's hand to comprehend the darkness sword intent. Once he comprehended the darkness sword intent, he would possess the four great sword intents, and his god force would rise to a whole new level, reaching an unprecedented level. Strands. The demonic sword saint's strength was slightly weaker than Yi Chen's, but if Yi Chen wanted to defeat the other party, it wouldn't be something that could be done in a day. Moreover, Yi Chen didn't plan to defeat the other party so quickly. He needed to comprehend the darkness sword intent first. As time passed, a strand of darkness sword intent finally formed in Yi Chen's soul sea. At first, this strand of darkness sword intent wasn't enough to form the darkness sword soul. But as the battle continued, the darkness sword intent grew stronger and stronger, eventually forming a Tier 1 sword soul, followed by Tier 2, Tier 3. Several years passed, and the darkness sword intent reached early stage Tier 9. The reason why it could improve so quickly was because Yi Chen's cultivation level was too high. The other three great sword intents were all perfected, and he himself was an ultimate sword saint. If he were in the heaven-earth cosmos, he wouldn't be able to improve so quickly. At the very least, he would need thousands or even tens of thousands of years to reach Tier 9. Although the darkness sword intent was already at Tier 9, Yi Chen didn't fuse it with his god force. He didn't want to alert the demonic sword saint. If the other party realized that he was using him to comprehend the darkness sword intent, he would definitely leave. Without the demonic sword saint, if Yi Chen wanted to continue improving the darkness sword intent, it would take a long time. Mid-stage Tier 9. Late-stage Tier 9. Unknowingly, Yi Chen and the demonic sword saint had been fighting for hundreds of years. Yi Chen used the demonic sword saint to comprehend the darkness sword intent, and the demonic sword saint also used Yi Chen to comprehend the essence of the sword Dao. After all, the demon god wasn't a sword god and couldn't provide much help to the demonic sword saint in terms of the sword Dao. Therefore, the demonic sword saint loved to fight with the ultimate sword saint of the sword god palace and absorb the essence of the sword Dao. On the other side, the demonic sword saint was also fighting with the peerless sword saint. The peerless sword saint had the advantage in terms of his god force, while the demonic sword saint had the advantage in terms of his great demon king bloodline, which had been developed to the extreme. As a bloodline created by the demon god, once the great demon king bloodline was developed to the extreme, it would be equivalent to a weapon of war, and its body would be extraordinarily strong. Peerless sword saint, you are indeed stronger than me. Unfortunately, you must die today. The demonic sword saint let out a loud roar, and two ultimate battle sages of the demon god palace suddenly appeared beside him. Black light surged, and the three of them fused together to form a bloodline battle sage. This bloodline battle sage was 50% similar to the demonic sword saint, except that he was twice as tall, and his ferocious aura was also more than twice as strong. He looked abnormally ferocious. Peerless sword saint, die. The demonic sword saint, who had transformed into a bloodline battle sage, flashed and charged at the peerless sword saint. His speed was so fast that it surpassed the peerless sword saint's reaction. A punch landed on the peerless sword saint's abdomen, and the peerless sword saint was sent flying high into the air. However, this was not the end. The demonic sword saint caught up to the peerless sword saint, who had been thrown into the air, and clawed at the peerless sword saint's back, leaving a deep bloody mark. The peerless sword saint, who had the upper hand, was now at a complete disadvantage. He had no way of fighting back. On Yi Chen's side, the situation that had been evenly matched also changed. The demonic sword saint seemed to have noticed Yi Chen's abnormality and felt that it would not be good for him to continue fighting. This is the end. Not wanting to continue fighting, the demonic sword saint waved his hand, and two ultimate battle sages of the demon god palace appeared beside him. These two ultimate battle sages had been hiding in the demonic sword saint's space of light and darkness. At the crucial moment, they could quickly fuse into a bloodline battle sage to prevent any accidents. After using the bloodline divine skill, the demonic sword saint fused with the two ultimate battle sages of the demon god palace, and his strength increased by many times. Yi Chen was caught off guard and was hit several hundred times in a row. He could not react at all. This won't do. Sensing that his Yuan Shen was being damaged, Yi Chen could no longer hide his darkness sword intent. With a thought, the late-stage 9th Order darkness sword intent merged with his divine power, causing the quality of his divine power to increase once again. Whoosh! With his divine power becoming stronger, Yi Chen barely managed to exchange blows with the demonic sword saint and was sent flying. Along the way he changed his trajectory and dodged another attack from the demonic sword saint. Chapter 1482. After all, the late-stage 9th tier darkness sword intent wasn't the perfect one. It didn't give Yi Chen a huge boost in strength, and it didn't allow Yi Chen to reverse the situation. No wonder? So he was making use of me to comprehend the darkness sword intent. Sensing the changes in Yi Chen's god force, how could the demon sword saint not understand Yi Chen's goal? He was enraged and his attacks became even more ferocious. Sword like ink, sword like tides. The demon sword saint didn't choose the strongest technique but chose the one with the widest range, making it impossible for Yi Chen to dodge. Spurting out a mouthful of fresh blood, Yi Chen's chest was pierced once more. If the fusion of his god force with the late-stage 9th tier darkness sword intent increased Yi Chen's strength by 100 times, the demon sword saint's strength increased by at least 1,000 times. Although he wouldn't be insta-killed, he would definitely die if the battle dragged on. Suffering heavy blows again and again, Yi Chen suddenly felt the world stop. In his mind, the first high-grade divine inscription diagram flickered unceasingly, as though something was about to be born. Abruptly, a bright light flashed as Yi Chen subconsciously slashed out with his sword. Sparks flew as the demon sword saint was flung backwards. The might of Yi Chen's sword strike earlier was too great, and the demon sword saint felt his arm going numb as his blood and chi surged. What? The demon sword saint stared at Yi Chen as he recalled the scene earlier. High-grade divine art? The demon sword saint frowned, feeling uncertain. Is this the crisscrossing sword heart? Yi Chen regained his senses as a look of contemplation appeared on his face. Over 100 million years, Yi Chen had exchanged for all 3 high-grade divine inscriptions. Although he couldn't comprehend them in a short period of time, he was able to memorize every stroke of the divine inscription. Every detail was engraved in his mind, and at the most crucial moment, he would be able to comprehend a trace of enlightenment. Hard work paid off. Perhaps it was because he had seen the Supreme Sword Saint use the crisscrossing sword heart countless times, or perhaps it was because his own realm was high enough, but under the pressure of the demon sword saint, Yi Chen easily comprehended the first high-level sword technique, the crisscrossing sword heart. The crisscrossing sword heart didn't have any specific moves. It was a kind of power that came from the soul. If one could comprehend it, then they would comprehend it. If one couldn't comprehend it, then they would never comprehend it. Once they comprehended the crisscrossing sword heart, even the most ordinary sword moves would be able to burst forth with astonishing power. After comprehending the crisscrossing sword heart, Yi Chen had officially surpassed the peerless sword saint in all aspects and was now catching up to the idealistic sword saint. Again. I don't believe it. The demon sword saint refused to believe it. He pounced at Yi Chen once more. The black demonic sword danced in an airtight manner, blanketing the sky as it enveloped Yi Chen with a powerful aura. Open. With a wave of the 5-element sword, the sky full of black sword shadows was torn apart. Stretching his body, Yi Chen launched a counterattack against the demon sword saint who had transformed into a bloodline battle sage for the first time. The demon sword saint felt so uncomfortable that he wanted to vomit blood. He could clearly react with his mind, but his body couldn't keep up. His body was struck 5 times in a row, and each sword passed through his body. Crisscrossing sword heart, only I am undefeated. In the beginning, Yi Chen was still a bit unfamiliar with the crisscrossing sword heart. However, as time passed, Yi Chen gradually understood the true meaning of the crisscrossing sword heart. A person could be defeated, but the heart could not. If the heart was undefeated, then nothing in this world could make one lose. It was mysterious and contained the ultimate truth of the sword Tao. Sometimes the true truth itself was very simple. As the saying went, the great Tao was the simplest. How is this possible? I've fused with 2 ultimate battle sages, yet I'm still not his opponent. The demon sword saint was both shocked and angry. Yi Chen had completed the reversal, but the peerless sword saint wasn't so lucky. Peerless sword saint, today will be the day you die. The dragon-scale demon sage occasionally tore open the Peerless Sword Saint's throat with a claw, and at other times, punched a hole through the Peerless Sword Saint's abdomen. Many Ultimate Sword Saints nearby couldn't help but want to help. However, the dragon-scale demon sage, who had transformed into a bloodline battle sage, was extremely powerful. With a wave of his hand, the Ultimate Sword Saints that rushed over immediately turned into ashes. Haha, even if the idealistic Sword Saint appears, it won't help. The dragon-scale demon sage raised his head and laughed. Is that so? As soon as the dragon-scale demon sage finished speaking, an inconspicuous Ultimate Sword Saint suddenly spoke. His voice wasn't loud, and in this noisy environment, it should have been easy to ignore him. However, for some reason, his voice attracted everyone's attention. It's the Grass Bamboo Sword Saint. Grass Bamboo Sword Saint, what happened to you? The Sword Saints were inexplicably shocked. The Grass Bamboo Sword Saint was an ordinary Ultimate Sword Saint in the Sword God Palace. He was a very low-key person and didn't have many friends. Your strength is about the same as mine, yet you dare to be so arrogant. The Grass Bamboo Sword Saint's opponent was somewhat disdainful. He thought that the Grass Bamboo Sword Saint had lost his mind. Taking advantage of the Grass Bamboo Sword Saint's distraction, he suddenly charged over, wanting to launch a sneak attack on the Grass Bamboo Sword Saint. The Grass Bamboo Sword Saint seemed to have changed into a different person. He was calm and magnanimous, and a trace of extreme dominance was hidden in his temperament. With a glare, two beams of light flashed, and the Ultimate Battle Saint from the Demon God Palace exploded. He killed an ordinary Ultimate Battle Saint with just his gaze. Even the Limitless Sword Saint couldn't compare to such strength. Everyone was stunned and their mouths were wide open. The Idealistic Sword Saint. The Limitless Sword Saint revealed a look of realization. The Idealistic Sword Saint, it's you. The Dragon-Scale Demon Sage was the second to react, and he shouted. So it's the Idealistic Sword Saint. This is great. I was wondering why the Idealistic Sword Saint didn't appear. It turns out that he has always been by our side, but we couldn't discover him. Yes, the Idealistic Sword Saint should be observing something. That's why he hasn't shown himself. As long as the Idealistic Sword Saint is here, we will definitely win. The Sword Saints discussed animatedly, and their faces were filled with joy. He's the Idealistic Sword Saint? From afar, Yi Chen saw the Idealistic Sword Saint. He didn't know why, but the Idealistic Sword Saint gave him a very familiar feeling. However, he knew very well that the two of them had never met before. As if they had a telepathic connection, the Idealistic Sword Saint also looked at Yi Chen in the distance, and a trace of doubt appeared in his eyes. The Idealistic Sword Saint, so what if you're here? With your strength, you're at most on par with me. The Dragon-Scale Demon Sage was very confident. The Idealistic Sword Saint was indeed very strong, ridiculously strong. He could almost defeat the Limitless Sword Saint and the Dragon-Scale Demon Sage before transforming into a Bloodline Battle Saint. However, this was before transforming into a Bloodline Battle Saint. After transforming into a Bloodline Battle Saint, the Dragon-Scale Demon Sage felt as if he had become a god, and his strength was about to explode. Whether it's true or not, we'll know once we try. The Idealistic Sword Saint smiled faintly, and his body suddenly emitted a sword intent that was like a breeze. This sword intent was faint and illusory, as if it came from beyond the 9 heavens. Although it wasn't very powerful, it was enough to make one's soul tremble. Have a taste of my Sword God Palace's second advanced sword technique, Sword Traversing Taishu. The Idealistic Sword Saint disappeared and was replaced by a wisp of sword light, an illusory, formless and colorless sword light. Chapter 1483. Seeing the appearance of this sword ray, the demon sage's expression changed drastically. He could feel that this sword ray was a great threat to him. It could severely injure or even kill him. The moment the sword ray appeared, the demon sage even thought that he had been locked on by a true god. Of course, that was only a momentary illusion. The lock-on of a true god was far more terrifying than this. It's the roaming sword of the void. I remember that in the previous War of Gods, he had only managed to comprehend the surface of the roaming sword of the void. Looking at this scene, he should have mastered the roaming sword of the void. The Limitless Sword Sage had a look of admiration on his face. He was also comprehending Swimming Sword Taishu, but he could not find the threshold. If he could not even find the threshold, he naturally could not comprehend it. If he could comprehend Swimming Sword Taishu, it would be impossible for the Demon Sage who had transformed into a Bloodline Battle Sage to defeat him. An instant was an eternity. The sword ray formed by the idealistic sword sage moved. Like a stream of air, the sword ray swept across the demon sage's body under everyone's gaze. The demon sage's body was cut in half. His face was filled with astonishment. He could not react at all. Again and again the power of the sword ray was extremely strong. After breaking free from the restraints of the human body, the sword ray was the human and the human was the sword ray. There was no distinction between them. It was as if the sword had a human nature. It was no longer affected by space or timing. This was the true meaning of becoming one with the sword. The essence of swimming sword Taishu was becoming one with the sword. Idealistic sword sage, do you think you have won? The reason why I did not kill the limitless sword sage so quickly was to force you out. The demon sage, who had been cut into thousands of pieces, laughed. 3 ultimate battle sages of the demon celestial palace suddenly appeared. They exploded into pieces of flesh and merged with the demon sage's flesh. Countless pieces of flesh moved closer to the center, as if a huge ball of flesh was shrinking. The sword ray formed by the idealistic sword sage became slower and slower. If it was like cutting cheese and tofu at the beginning, it was like cutting rock and steel now. The resistance increased rapidly. The sword light once again pierced through the ball of flesh. The idealistic sword saint stopped attacking and watched from afar. At that moment, the ball of flesh was only several meters wide, and it was incredibly dense. Waves of resplendent godly power burst forth, as if countless stars had gathered together and were compressed to a size of several meters. The space-time of the twilight plane started to collapse. 6 in 1. The idealistic sword saint transformed from a sword gleam into a human form. According to his observations, the demon god palace's bloodline divine skill could only fuse with 6 battle saints at most, not more than 1. He originally thought that the more powerful the demon god palace was, the fewer battle saints it could fuse with. Who would have thought that it was just a disguise? No one knew how powerful the fusion of 6 different godly powers would be. The meatball wriggled and the heterogeneous godly powers began to fuse together. In the next moment, a bloodline battle sage that looked somewhat similar to the dragon-scale demon sage appeared. This was a bloodline battle sage that was 5 meters tall. Its body was covered in spikes and dragon scales. There was also a curved horn on its chin, and its eyes were compound. Boom! The dragon-scale demon sage punched the ground, and the violent shockwave tore apart the bodies of dozens of ultimate sword sages. The idealistic sword saint was also sent flying, and he spat out a large amount of flesh and blood. His martial yuan spirit was severely injured. Idealistic sword saint, today will be the day your legend breaks. The dragon-scaled demon sage roared and punched toward the idealistic sword saint. Gotcha. The space-time of the twilight plains shattered. It was as if a huge crystal had a crack in the middle, and the idealistic sword saint was at the center of the interweaving cracks. The twilight plains were shrouded in the laws of dusk. To shatter the space-time here, one would need the power of a true god. No one present thought that the dragon-scaled demon sage had the power of a true god, but it was still extremely terrifying, far surpassing the concept of a demigod. If one had to describe it, it would be a quasi-god. Since the space-time of the twilight plains had shattered, the idealistic sword saint's body should have shattered as well. However, that was not the case. The idealistic sword saint's body twisted a lot, but it did not shatter. His divine power was extremely strange. It was like paste, yet also like glue sticking the shattered space-time cracks together. It was just that the space-time fragments had been dislocated, causing the idealistic sword saint's body to be dislocated as well. At this moment, the idealistic sword saint and the surrounding space-time gave off a feeling of chaos and disorder. Chaos sword intent and darkness sword intent. Yi Chen was surprised by the idealistic sword saint's sword intent. He did not expect the idealistic sword saint to have comprehended the darkness sword intent and the chaos sword intent, the strongest of the 5 supreme sword intents. As a sword saint of the sword god palace, he did not comprehend the immortal sword intent or the radiant sword intent. Instead, he comprehended the darkness sword intent and the chaos sword intent. Yet he did not give off an evil feeling. This made Yi Chen feel strange and puzzled. Whoosh! Maintaining the shattered space-time, the idealistic sword saint transformed into a sword gleam and left the shattered space-time. Did you have a good time fighting me? Opposite Yi Chen, the demonic sword saint smiled coldly. 3 ultimate battle sages of the demon god palace appeared beside him. Immediately after, these 3 ultimate battle sages fused into his body. Just like the long-scale demon saint, the demonic sword saint could also fuse with 5 ultimate battle sages. Including himself, there were 6 ultimate battle sages. 3 ultimate battle sages and 6 ultimate battle sages. The difference in numbers was double, but the difference in power was 1,000 times. His flesh expanded, and the demonic sword saint transformed into a bloodline battle sage with extremely well-developed upper limbs. He looked somewhat similar to the demonic sword saint. His legs were very slender and looked extremely explosive. Whoosh! The black sword danced and space-time was sliced apart. It was as if a fan-shaped section had appeared in the center of a crystal, and Yi Chen's body was stuck in the fan-shaped section. In terms of godly power, Yi Chen's godly power was even stronger than the idealistic sword saints. Therefore, this sword that could slice apart space-time was unable to cut through Yi Chen's body. It only caused a sharp wound to appear on his body. Sword traversing Taishu. Yi Chen's body twisted, and his entire body seemed to have transformed into a wisp of sword light as he broke free from the shackles. For some reason, just by seeing the idealistic sword saint use the second high-level godly sword technique, sword traversing Taishu, Yi Chen had a deep understanding of it. He tried to use it and actually managed to do it even though it was still very immature and superficial. In the sky, Yi Chen and the demonic sword saint faced each other from afar. The idealistic sword saint and the long-scale demon saint faced each other from afar. Even higher up in the sky, the sun and the stars mixed together. It was rare for the twilight plains to be bathed in sunlight and dazzling stars. However, such a beautiful scene would only cause everyone to sink into an atmosphere of mass extinction. A battle of gods was not a joke, and the ultimate battle of gods was even more so. Boom. All of a sudden, the sky shook violently. Immediately after, a star dimmed. After an unknown amount of time, a huge corpse fell from the sky and smashed into the twilight plains, causing waves of destructive earthquakes. A true god had fallen. Sword god, so you've already passed away. In that case, there's no need for your sword god divine branch to exist anymore. A vast and deafening voice spread throughout the entire twilight plains. Chapter 1484. Demon God, let me, the desolate god, fight you. The stars in the sky shifted, and a huge star approached the sun represented by the demon god. The one who had just fallen was a true god from the sword god celestial system. Without the sword god, no one could stop the demon god. The desolate god was one of the top few true gods in the sword god celestial system, so he thought that he could stop the demon god. Boom. The sun and the star collided, and the twilight plain became even darker. The sunlight and starlight that filled the sky had long been intercepted by the shattered space and shifted to some unknown place. Gotcha. In the sky, a foot suddenly landed, and the twilight plain caved in for tens of thousands of miles. God knew how many battle saints and sword saints were trampled to death. Soon, the knee of the foot bent, and with a sudden bounce, it disappeared. Demon God, come again? It turned out that the foot that landed was the desolate god. After all, he was not a main god. He dared to fight with the demon god because he had a strong divine body. However, after a few moves, he was beaten to the twilight plain by the demon god. The true gods were fighting in the sky, and the demigods were fighting on the twilight plain. Both heaven and man were angry, and the law of dusk was getting thicker and thicker. Sword swimming Taishu. Yi Chen performed sword swimming Taishu again and again. In the beginning, Yi Chen was not a match for the demon sword saint, who had 6 in 1. No matter how sharp the sword light was, it would be blown away by the demon sword saint's sword. However, after a few hundred times, Yi Chen's sword swimming Taishu became more and more perfect. Even he himself did not know why he could learn in perfect sword swimming Taishu so quickly. Could it be that he had learned all the beginner and intermediate sword skills? But the absolute sword saint and the idealistic sword saint had learned all the beginner and intermediate sword skills a long time ago, and yet they had not mastered sword swimming Taishu in such a short time. Maybe my comprehension is also unique in the heaven realm. Yi Chen naturally knew that his greatest advantage was his perception. When he was young, Yi Chen's cultivation talent was not particularly outstanding. However, his perception was extremely high, and he could easily cultivate his cultivation technique to the highest realm. The higher the realm of his cultivation technique, the faster his cultivation speed would naturally increase. Therefore, although his cultivation talent was not particularly outstanding, his cultivation speed was faster than those with outstanding cultivation talent. The reason why Yi Chen could reach where he was today was all because of his comprehensive ability. Without it, he would not even be as good as Duguju. Perhaps he would have died of old age in the true spirit continent countless years ago, never to see the outside world again. Dang dang dang. With a punch, space-time shattered. The idealistic sword saint used all his strength to break free from the shackles of space-time. His aura grew weaker and weaker. Obviously, after a long battle, his martial yuan spirit was heavily damaged. Idealistic sword saint, I heard that your sword god palace has 3 advanced sword skills. You have already comprehended the first and second. Maybe you can kill me after comprehending the third. Why don't you try it? He would not be able to kill Idealism Sword Saint in a short period of time. He did not think that Idealism Sword Saint would be able to comprehend the third high-level Sword Path God skill. His Demon God Palace had 2 high-level Sword Path God skills, but he had only comprehended the first one. Legend had it that if he could comprehend the second high-level Sword Path God skill, he might be able to become a true god. Sword God Palace should be able to comprehend the third high-level Sword Path God skill. Since you want to try, I'll fulfill your wish. The Idealistic Sword Saint suddenly landed on the ground with his hands behind his back. He looked calm. What a joke. You want to scare me? It's still too early. The Dragon Scale Demon Saint sneered and pounced over. Sword Way alone. Suddenly, a shocking aura burst forth. With the Idealistic Sword Saint at the center, the Law of Dusk within a radius of several hundred miles retreated. Then lines of sword-like patterns spread out and covered the sky. Wherever they went, the air, the plants, the sound, and the vital chi became swords. Everything within a radius of several hundred miles could be turned into swords. Even time and space had been turned into swords. The essence of the third advanced sword skill, Sword Way alone, was to condense the laws of Sword Way and use them to replace the laws of chaos and the laws of dusk. This was equivalent to turning the space one was in into one's own home ground. The reason why the chief gods were so strong was because their god laws were strong enough to make the laws of chaos retreat. For example, the demon gods' demon laws, the immortal laws of immortality, and the destruction laws of destruction. As a chief god, the sword god's laws of Sword Way were not many. They were far inferior to the sword god's laws of Sword God, but it was still not something that the Dragon Scale Demon Saint could resist. A radius of a few hundred miles was filled with the laws of Sword Way. The Idealistic Sword Saint stabbed at the Dragon Scale Demon Saint. Ah! Dragon Scale Demon Saint screamed. He realized that he couldn't use his diabolical divine skills, and he couldn't even use the nomological laws. The only thing he could use was his divine power, and it was only a portion of his divine power. Under the shroud of the sword principle, the diabolical will in his divine power was sealed. Only the power that didn't go against the sword principle could exist. The appearance of Sword Way alone allowed the Idealistic Sword Saint to become the #1 Sword Saint of the Sword God Palace again. The Dragon Scale Demon Saint suddenly became a fish on the chopping board. Crack. However, at this moment, the sword patterns in the void suddenly cracked. Like a deflated balloon, the laws of Sword Way collapsed and could no longer restrain the Dragon Scale Demon Saint's power. The sword that the Idealistic Sword Saint stabbed out did not even penetrate the Dragon Scale Demon Saint's defense. It was bounced off and sparks flew everywhere. The Idealistic Sword Saint spat out large mouthfuls of blood. His entire body aged and wrinkles appeared on his face. He had only comprehended a little bit of Sword Way alone. Out of 10 times he could not use it. This time he was very lucky to be able to use it. It was a pity that the time he could use it was too short, so short that it was not enough to kill the Dragon Scale Demon Saint. Apart from that, the price of using Sword Way alone was very high. In order to maintain the laws of Sword Way alone in this short period of time, his god power and martial path Yuan Shen had been sucked out by 80 to 90%. This was equivalent to 80 to 90% of his lifespan being sucked out. With so much of his origin being sucked out in such a short period of time, the damage was terrifying. Without the help of a true god, he would not be able to recover in this lifetime. Without becoming a true god, even if he comprehended Sword Way alone, he would not be able to use it more than a few times. This was what the Idealistic Sword Saint knew. Only those with strong enough god power could use it. Ha ha ha! The Dragon Scale Demon Saint laughed. He had almost died under this terrifying third high-level Sword Way divine skill. It was a pity that fate was on his side and had abandoned him. Idealistic Sword Saint, what else do you have to say now? Even fate has abandoned you. So go to hell. Sensing that the Idealistic Sword Saint was in an unprecedentedly weak state, the Dragon Scale Demon Saint unleashed his most powerful attack. He punched through space and time. Clang. A sword blocked the Dragon Scale Demon Saint's attack. This sword did not belong to the Idealistic Sword Saint. It belonged to Yi Chen. The Idealistic Sword Saint could not be killed. This was Yi Chen's premonition. He had a feeling that if the Idealistic Sword Saint died, the sword god divine system would not be able to reverse the situation. He did not know where this feeling came from. After all, even if the idealistic sword saint did not die, he was just a sword saint, a demigod. What truly determined everyone's fate was a battle between true gods. I will use sword way alone. You kill the two of them. The idealistic sword saint's voice reached Yi Chen's ears. You. Yi Chen hesitated slightly. If the idealistic sword saint used sword way alone again, he would definitely die. I can't be killed. I can only die using the revered way of the sword. Perhaps it's so that you can comprehend the revered way of the sword. I believe you already know that there is a deep connection between us. Everything has a cause and effect. I want to know where our cause is. The idealistic sword saint smiled indifferently. At this moment he did not have any regrets about dying. Instead he felt a sense of relief. The demon sword saint and the dragon scale demon saint gathered together. The two of them planned to work together to kill Yi Chen. As for the idealistic sword saint, he was already a cripple in their eyes. However, when a cripple gave up on life, miracles would sometimes happen. Sword way alone. With a low shout, sword patterns spread out from the idealistic sword saint's body. In the blink of an eye, the sword patterns had spread out for hundreds of miles, enveloping the demon sword saint and the dragon scale demon saint. It's useless. You have only comprehended the surface. This move will collapse soon. The dragon scale demon saint was not shocked. That might not be the case. The idealistic sword saint's figure became illusory. It was as if the sword patterns were formed from his flesh and blood. In the end, the idealistic sword saint's figure was almost undetectable. Even his life aura had almost disappeared. Replacing it was the overwhelming sword Dao laws. With his life as the price, the idealistic sword saint had successfully used sword way alone. I understand. So that's how it is. In the void, the idealistic sword saint's voice came out and reverberated continuously. What did he understand? Yi Chen's expression was solemn. The idealistic sword saint had used his life to find out the answer, but Yi Chen was still clueless. I'll kill them first. No matter what, Yi Chen could not waste the opportunity that the idealistic sword saint had used his life to create. With a flash, Yi Chen attacked the dragon scale demon saint and the demon sword saint. No. The two strength had been restricted by countless times. How could they be a match for Yi Chen? Their martial Dao Yuan spirits were directly destroyed and their souls were scattered. They were deader than dead. After killing the two, the sword way alone still did not dissipate. The sword Dao laws covered a radius of hundreds of miles. Some sword sages who had barged in realized that their strength had increased rapidly while the enemy's strength had weakened rapidly. Suddenly, in the void, two sword phantoms shot towards Yi Chen. They were sword souls. One was black and the other was gray. These two sword souls seemed to have a consciousness of their own. They shot directly into Yi Chen's soul C, so much so that Yi Chen could not react in time. Is it the idealistic sword saint's darkness sword soul and chaos sword soul? Yi Chen was puzzled. He quickly used his inner vision to look at his soul C. In his soul C, waves were surging, and the five great sword souls were resonating with each other. The sword soul was a swordsman's will. The will couldn't be seized. What belonged to others would always belong to others, and it couldn't become one's own. Yi Chen did not know why the idealistic sword saint's sword soul would run into his soul C. It was unbelievable. Could it be that the idealistic sword saint's sword soul could become his sword soul? As this thought flashed through his mind, a scene that surprised Yi Chen happened. The idealistic sword saint's sword soul was really slowly forming a connection with his soul C. First was the darkness sword soul. Yi Chen's darkness sword soul was at the late stage rank 9. At this moment, the late stage rank 9 darkness sword soul was absorbing the idealistic sword saint's darkness sword soul. In a short while, Yi Chen's darkness sword soul was perfected, while the idealistic sword saint's darkness sword soul disappeared. Next was the chaos sword soul. Yi Chen's soul C didn't have a chaos sword soul. First, a trace of chaos sword intent was born. Then the chaos sword intent absorbed the chaos sword intent that drifted out of the chaos sword soul and gradually took shape, turning into a first-rank chaos sword soul. Second rank, third rank, fourth rank. After an unknown period of time, the fifth supreme sword soul appeared in Yi Chen's soul C. The idealistic sword saint's chaos sword soul was gone. He has 5 supreme sword souls at the same time, and all of them are perfected. Yi Chen felt like he was dreaming. Who is the idealistic sword saint? Who am I? No matter how strong Yi Chen's will was, he was at a loss at this moment. He was sure that he had never seen the idealistic sword saint before, nor did he have any connection with him. In terms of karma, it was impossible for the two of them to have any karma in this life. This life? Karma? All of a sudden Yi Chen thought of something. He recalled that his soul had transmigrated. Could it be that his soul had transmigrated and caused something to happen? In the sky above the twilight plain, the true gods were locked in a fierce battle. The starlight was dazzling. Perhaps it was an illusion, but someone noticed that the sky seemed to have been torn apart. Then a finger pressed down. It was an incomparably huge finger. It was the finger of a true god. The direction in which the finger was pressing was none other than the direction where the swords only shrouded. Chapter 1485. Evil God, you're so shameless. A furious roar came from the sky. Demonic God Celestial System and Sword God Celestial System were originally evenly matched. Sword God Celestial System was even slightly stronger. However, Sword God wasn't present, and a true God of Sword God Celestial System had fallen at the beginning, giving Demonic God Celestial System a huge advantage. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Evil God wanted to eliminate Yi Chen. He felt that Yi Chen had a chance of becoming a true god. The Evil God was one of the top few true gods in the Demon God deity system. Even a finger of his was not something that a demigod could withstand. Even a quasi-god would be easily crushed to death, no different from crushing an ant. The huge finger's momentum was like lightning, and it landed on Yi Chen's head in the blink of an eye. Gotcha. Cracks appeared on Sword Dao's only, and the Sword Dao laws started to become chaotic. After all, Sword Dao's only was not executed by a true god. Wanting to block a true god's attack was simply impossible. In the next moment, the Sword Dao laws shattered and Sword Dao's only collapsed. Just as Yi Chen and some ultimate sword saints were about to be crushed, a sword appeared out of nowhere and blocked the finger. I was wondering why the divine sword chose me. Turns out it was only passed through my hands to Green Lotus Sword Saint. This sword flew out from Sword Saint's storage ring. It was a true divine sword, possessing the might of a quasi-god. Before the ultimate god battle, this sword had chosen Sword Saint, making him exceptionally happy. He thought that the divine sword had chosen him, but he couldn't take it out no matter how hard he tried. Only now did he realize that the divine sword hadn't chosen him, but Yi Chen. Or rather, it had chosen the last person. Why aren't you holding me? The divine sword had a spirit, and it transmitted to Yi Chen. Although the divine sword's might was only at quasi-god level, its body was extremely tough. Even a true god's all-out attack couldn't destroy it. Only a master god could. Evil God's finger was not his full strength, and Evil God was not a master god either. Therefore, the divine sword was able to withstand the attack, but it lacked strength. Although it could temporarily block the finger, it didn't mean that it could withstand it forever. Divine sword. Yi Chen reacted and promptly held the divine sword, pouring a boundless divine power into it. The divine sword gave off an astonishing sword aura and blocked his finger. Even Yi Chen himself didn't know how strong Yi Chen's current divine power was. After integrating the perfect dark sword intent and the perfect chaos sword intent, Yi Chen's divine power continued to rise. Compared to before, it was more than 1,000 times stronger. Yi Chen had a feeling that his divine power seemed to be stronger than that of a true god. One should know that he wasn't a true god yet. The evil god's finger had not crushed Yi Chen to death, and he was quite shocked. Even though he had not used his full strength and had only casually attacked without even using a divine skill, he was still an evil god, one of the few true gods below chief gods. The divine power surged, and the power of the finger that the heretic god pressed down increased crazily. With a cracking sound, the ground beneath Yi Chen's feet caved in, and wisps of flames appeared between the finger and the divine sword. I can't hold on any longer. Yi Chen held the divine sword with both hands, trying his best to resist the pressure of the finger. Even so, he could still hear his body crumbling and the sound of his martial yuan spirit being worn down. Fortunately, the divine power that had merged with the 5 supreme sword intents would grow stronger with each setback. As the power of the heretic god's finger increased, the divine power became purer and more vast. If Yi Chen was a volcano, the divine power would be the magma that was about to erupt, and the heretic god's finger would be a huge rock that blocked the volcano's mouth, preventing the magma from erupting. But when the magma's eruption power reached a certain level, no one could stop it. I don't believe it. Withdrawing the finger, the heretic god clenched his fist and punched down. This punch was a divine skill that contained the heretic god's divine power and God's law. Rumble. The twilight plains trembled. The place where Yi Chen was directly sunk into the depths of the earth. With a single glance, it was impossible to tell how deep it was. In the dark void, Yi Chen kept sinking. The heretic god's full-force attack seemed to have shattered his consciousness. He kept sinking and drifting. Time seemed to have passed for billions of years or perhaps an eternity. Who am I? Memory fragments flashed by as Yi Chen's consciousness fluctuated. The fluctuations grew stronger and stronger. Yi Chen struggled, wanting to escape from this place. Sadly, he couldn't even feel his own body. Finally, Yi Chen remembered who he was. At the moment he remembered who he was, Yi Chen saw his own body, the vast heaven realm, and the primal chaos. Within his body, the martial Yuan spirit and the divine power started to fuse. Yi Chen's perception rose infinitely. He had never understood this world so well before, this chaos. A feeling of controlling heaven and earth filled his heart. I am Yi Chen. I am me. In the dark void, a ray of light was born. This ray of light grew brighter and brighter, finally turning into a huge sun that emitted eternal light. This aura? In the sky above the twilight plains, the true gods of the demon god system and sword god system looked down in shock. In the deep pit, a dazzling light burst out. The vast aura made the dusk laws of the twilight plains retreat. This was the aura of a true god. No, this was far beyond a true god's aura. They had only felt such an aura from the Chaos Master God. But in comparison there were still some differences. This aura was full of offensive power. It wasn't like the Chaos Master God's all-encompassing aura. It's the Chaos Divine Power, Chaos Sword Path Divine Power. The true gods of the Sword God system were surprised. They were sure that this was the Chaos Sword Path Divine Power because it was so similar to the Chaos Master Gods. The Chaos Master God's Chaos Divine Power contained the Immortal Will, the Destruction Will, the Light Will, the Darkness Will, and the Chaos Will. Yi Chen's Chaos Divine Power contained the 5 Supreme Sword Wills. In terms of attributes they were the same. But its offensive power surpassed that of the Chaos Master God's Chaos Divine Power. Flying out from the deep pit, Yi Chen kept flying upward. He flew to the void above the twilight plains. That was the battlefield of the true gods. Demigods couldn't fly up there. There was endless space between them. Yi Chen's body was extremely huge. His martial path Yuan Shen and Chaos Divine Power fused together. Yi Chen broke through the demigod realm and officially became a true god. He had a divine body and it was the Chaos Sword Path Divine Body. God's Law. The thought flashed in his mind. Yi Chen's 5 elemental laws started to fuse and form the God's Law. Only complementary laws could fuse to form the God's Law. Evil God, courtesy demands reciprocity. Take one of my moves. Facing the evil god, Yi Chen punched. A bright light flashed and a large half of the evil god's giant body was vaporized. The remaining half fell into the twilight plains and smashed a huge pit. I want to see how strong the chaos god power is. The demon god was a head god after all, so he wasn't frightened by Yi Chen's combat strength. The demon path expanded and the demon god pounced towards Yi Chen. Sword swimming Taishu. His body turned into a sword light as Yi Chen headed towards the demon god. Damn. Yi Chen was forced back. With the protection of the demon path, the moment Yi Chen entered the range of the demon path, his combat strength would be greatly reduced. This was the reason why the chief gods couldn't kill him. I see. Yi Chen understood that he couldn't kill the demon god, but he could seal him. Sword Path Supreme. With the Chaos Sword Path God power as the source, Yi Chen formed endless sword path laws. The sword path laws formed by the idealistic sword saint couldn't even be compared to a billionth of Yi Chen's. The sword path laws formed a ball and sealed the demon god within. As long as the Chaos Sword Path God power didn't scatter, the seal couldn't be removed. Even if the Chaos Chief God came personally, it would be useless. Go. With a push, the ball was banished into the chaos. Flee. Seeing that the Chief God was sealed, the remaining true gods all fled. Unfortunately, no matter how fast they fled, they couldn't be faster than Yi Chen's sword path laws. Pew 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 pew. One by one, the true gods of the demon god system fell and their corpses fell on the twilight plains. On this day, the number of true gods that died in the twilight plains was unprecedented. The twilight plains seemed to have become the dusk of the true gods and was filled with an inauspicious aura. Welcome, Chief God. The true gods of the sword god system all bowed to Yi Chen. With the sword god gone, Yi Chen would be the new chief god and the unprecedented chaos sword god. His status wouldn't be any lower than the Chaos Chief God. The Sword God went to a faraway place. You should all return. I have a guest to greet. Yi Chen said lightly. What about below? A true god pointed at the battle on the Twilight Plains. This is also training. Don't worry about them. The demon god system no longer had any true gods, so the battle on the Twilight Plains naturally became training. The true gods were high above and wouldn't care about such trivial matters. After the true gods left, Yi Chen looked into the void. Chaos Chief God, since you're here, why don't you show yourself? Chaos Sword God. An old man walked out of the void. It was the Chaos Chief God. Looking at Yi Chen, the Chaos Chief God sighed. Coincidence is also inevitable. Since you've become the Chaos Sword God, your status won't be lower than mine. I hope you can maintain the order of the chaos and don't destroy it. Yi Chen's current strength was unfathomable. Although the chief god could use the omnipresent chaos law, he couldn't restrict him or even seal him. The chaos law wasn't his after all. It belonged to the chaos. Yi Chen's sword Dao law was enough to make the chaos law retreat. It was just that the range wasn't as large. You can stop me from becoming the chaos sword god, Yi Chen said. The chief god shook his head. I can't stop you on the Twilight Plains. The Twilight Law is the final phase of the Chaos Law. Once you're tainted by the Twilight Law, even the chief god will be in trouble. The evil god interfered in the Twilight Plains and died. Although it was a little fast, it was in line with karma. I see. Yi Chen understood now. It was no wonder that the Twilight Plains became the location of the ultimate divine battle. Here the true gods wouldn't interfere. If they did, they would only bring bad luck to themselves. The Twilight Law was the final phase of the Chaos Law. Since even the Chaos had its final phase, so did the true gods. To the true gods, as long as they didn't die, they would have a chance to rise again. I can tell that you're someone who doesn't like to be left alone. Maybe I'm overthinking. The chief god of chaos smiled. The sword god roamed the chaos and never came back. The chaos sword god before him would probably walk the same path. Maybe. Yi Chen looked at the chaos outside the heavenly realm. At the very end, Yi Chen seemed to see something, but at the same time, he didn't see anything. After becoming the Chaos Sword God, Yi Chen knew about his past and present lives. The reason why he had such a heaven-defying comprehension was not because of the fusion of souls, but because when his soul was transmigrated, the Sword God shot a ray of light into his soul, and the Idealism Sword Saint was also shot into his soul. That was when the Idealism Sword Saint first entered the heaven realm. Yi Chen did not know what the ray of light was, but it should be a strange thing in the chaos. This ray of light was originally one, but the Sword God split it into two, one for himself and one for the Idealism Sword Saint. When the two met, only one could survive, so everything was the Sword God's plan. Sword God, I wonder where you are? Recollecting his thoughts, Yi Chen stood up and left. In the distance, two children were playing. When they saw Yi Chen, they flew over. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.